Loveliest listener of the ton. On the night London decided to be entertained, Miss Cordelia Wren stood in a borrowed gown and prepared to do something unforgivable. She intended to win. Not a husband, not a title, a way out. The Merrimont charity auction was supposed to be respectable, an evening where society congratulated itself for generosity while purchasing amusements in silk gloves. A painted fan, a rare book, a dance, a person, if one used pretty enough words. Cordelia arrived late, precisely as the orchestra began a waltz that sounded too cheerful to be trusted. She was 22, with dark hair pinned neatly, a face that looked innocent until you noticed her eyes, too steady, too observant, too practiced at measuring danger. She wore pearl earrings that were not hers, and a pale lavender gown that had been altered overnight to fit her ribs, as though she were a secret being forced into shape. At her side, her guardian, Lady Pettigrew, smiled like a woman shepherding livestock. "Remember," Lady Pettigrew murmured, "you are here to be selected, not to select." Cordelia returned a calm, dutiful smile. "Yes, Lady Pettigrew." She did not say what she was really thinking. "Tonight, I will be selected by the highest bidder. And I will make certain the highest bidder is the one man in London who should never, ever want me." Across the ballroom, men and women glittered like cut glass. The air smelled of citrus and candle wax and money. Laughter rose in soft waves. Secrets lived under every pleasantry. Cordelia kept her chin lifted as she moved through the room, because she had learned that if you appear uncertain, society will push, and if you appear needy, society will eat. She reached the edge of the crowd just as the hostess, the Dowager Duchess of Merrimont, clapped her hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Duchess announced, eyes bright with mischief, "we shall begin the bidding." The room responded with delighted murmurs, London's favorite sound, permission. A footman brought forward the first lot, a jeweled snuff-box. Hands fluttered, bids rose, polite applause followed. Harmless. Then came the second lot, a private dinner with a viscount known for charming women and forgetting their names. Laughter too loud. Cordelia's stomach tightened because she knew what was coming. She had read the list, hidden in Lady Pettigrew's desk. Lot 7, the final lot, the one everyone pretended was a joke because jokes were safer than truth. Cordelia, on impulse that had become strategy, turned her gaze toward the far end of the room. And there he was, Lord Adrian Blackwell. Not a lord by birth, a lord by money. A man the ton did not know how to classify, which meant they did not know how to control him. Adrian stood near a marble column, half-shadowed, dressed in black so severe it made other men look like peacocks. 29, tall, lean, and beautifully composed as though he had taught himself never to react first. His hair was dark, his jaw clean-shaven, his eyes an unnerving gray that seemed to strip rooms down to their lies. The whispers around him were always contradictory. He's a genius. He's a brute. He bought his title. He doesn't need one. He owns half the shipping in the Channel. He never dances. He never smiles. Cordelia watched him with the unpleasant certainty that he would be her salvation or her destruction. She just hadn't decided which. The Duchess continued the auction, trinkets, paintings, a waltz with a charming duke. Then, at last, the Duchess's eyes gleamed. "And now," she purred, "our final offering." The room shifted, breath tightened, fans lifted like shields. A footman brought forward the first lot. The Duchess read it slowly, savoring. A dance, ladies and gentlemen, and a private conversation with Miss Cordelia Wren. Cordelia felt the world go perfectly, brutally still. Her name rippled through the room like a stone dropped into water. She could feel the looks landing on her, appraisal, curiosity, hunger. A woman whispered, too sweetly, "Isn't she the one with no family?" A man murmured, "She's pretty enough to sell." Lady Pettigrew's hand pressed into Cordelia's elbow, hard. "Smile," she hissed through her teeth. "You'll fetch a fine sum." Cordelia smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was a blade of a smile. Bidding began. A baron raised a hand, then another, then a wealthy viscount collected women the way he collected racehorses. Cordelia kept her eyes forward, hands clasped, face calm, while her pulse screamed, because she understood the game in a way the room did not. This wasn't charity. This was purchase disguised as entertainment. Then a voice cut through the bidding, low, calm, unhurried. 50 guineas. The room snapped toward the source. Adrian had not moved. He hadn't raised his voice. He simply spoke as though he were naming a fact. Murmurs erupted. 50? He's mad. He's making a point. He's making a spectacle. The Viscount laughed. 60. Adrian's gaze stayed on Cordelia. 80. Cordelia's stomach flipped. This was too high now, too loud. Lady Pettigrew's eyes glittered. "Excellent," she breathed, as though Cordelia were a vase. The Viscount's smile thinned. 100. A hush. Even the orchestra softened, sensing blood. Adrian didn't blink. 150. The room collectively inhaled. The Duchess's fan fluttered, delighted. "Oh, Lord Blackwell," she sighed, "how generous." Adrian's mouth did not move into a smile. "I'm not generous," he said. "I'm precise." The Viscount's face reddened. 200, he snapped. Cordelia's hands went cold. She had expected Adrian to bid. She had not expected him to fight. Adrian finally took a step forward. His gaze remained locked on Cordelia as though the entire ton had vanished. 300, he said. The room broke into stunned murmurs. This was no longer sport. This was war. The Viscount sputtered, but the room was watching him now, judging him. To back down would look weak. To continue would look desperate. He lifted his chin. 350. Adrian's voice didn't rise. 500. A silence so complete it felt like a verdict. The Viscount's mouth opened, then closed. He lowered his hand. The Duchess beamed like a cat with cream. "Sold," she declared, "to Lord Blackwell." Applause erupted, gleeful, cruel, delighted. Cordelia's skin prickled. Lady Pettigrew leaned close, breath hot with triumph. "Do not embarrass me," she whispered. "You will go with him." Cordelia turned her head slightly. "I intended to," she murmured. Lady Pettigrew blinked. Cordelia's smile sharpened. "Because I chose him." Adrian crossed the room with the unhurried step of a man who knew he was being watched and did not care. He stopped before Cordelia and offered his hand. Up close, he smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. His eyes, cool gray, assessed her with unnerving focus, as though he was trying to determine whether she was trap or treasure. Cordelia placed her gloved hand in his. His fingers closed gently, not possessive, but certain. "You're trembling," Adrian said quietly. Cordelia lifted her chin. "You paid 500 guineas for me. Wouldn't you tremble?" Adrian's gaze flicked to the crowd, those bright, hungry faces. "They think they witnessed a purchase," he murmured. Cordelia's pulse jumped. "And didn't they?" she whispered. Adrian's eyes returned to hers. "No," he said, "they witnessed a theft." Cordelia's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Adrian guided her away from the center of the ballroom toward a narrow corridor lined with portraits, ancestors staring down with painted disapproval. "I mean," he said softly, "that Lady Pettigrew owes debt, large debt, dangerous debt. She has been paying it by offering girls to men who like to collect pretty things." Cordelia's throat tightened so hard she could barely speak. "I am not a pretty thing," Adrian finished. "I am not property." Cordelia's eyes flashed with something like approval. "Good," he murmured, "because I didn't pay for your body, Miss Wren." Cordelia's heart hammered. "Then why did you?" Adrian leaned slightly closer. "Because you're not the only one being sold," he said, "and you're the only one in that room who knows it." Cordelia's stomach dropped. She did know it, because 2 nights ago she had overheard Lady Pettigrew speaking to a man behind the library door, describing Cordelia as compliant, as though she were a horse, and describing another girl as well, a younger girl, her friend. Eliza Rowan, 16, bright-eyed, desperate to believe London could be kind. Cordelia's voice shook, the first crack of her composure. "Eliza," she whispered. Adrian nodded once. "They intend to sell her next," he said, "and if we don't stop it tonight, she will vanish and the Ton will applaud the charity auction that paid for her disappearance." Cordelia's breath trembled. "And you?" she managed. "What do you gain from stopping it?" Adrian's eyes held hers for a long beat. Then he said something that hit like a slap. "I gain you not dying in a gilded cage, and I gain the satisfaction of watching Lady Pettigrew fall." Cordelia's spine straightened. "You hate her." Adrian's jaw tightened. "My sister," he said, voice low, "was sold into a marriage when she was 15. Cordelia's breath caught. "She died before she turned 17. The corridor seemed to narrow. Adrian's eyes darkened, and London called it unfortunate, he said, and then went back to dancing. Cordelia felt a hot, violent rage rise in her chest. "I want her ruined," Cordelia's voice whispered. Adrian's gaze sharpened. "No," he corrected softly, "you want her exposed." A difference with teeth. Cordelia looked at him. This man was dangerous, not because he could break rules, but because he could break systems. "Tell me what to do," Cordelia said quietly. Adrian's mouth barely curved. "We're going to give London a better show," he murmured. They returned to the ballroom together. That was the first scandal. A man like Adrian Blackwell escorting a nobody like Cordelia Wren as though she were a duchess. Whispers rose instantly. "She's caught him. He's mocking the auction. He'll ruin her for sport." Cordelia's kept her chin lifted. Adrian's hand stayed light at her waist as they moved through the crowd. They approached the dais where the Duchess of Merrowmont sat, flushed with triumph. Adrian's voice was polite. "Your Grace." The Duchess fluttered her fan. "Lord Blackwell, you've made this evening positively legendary." Adrian's gaze did not soften. "Then let us make it useful," he said. The Duchess blinked. "Pardon?" Adrian reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. He held it out. "A ledger." The Duchess's eyes glittered. "What is that?" Adrian's voice carried, not loudly, but clear enough that the closest cluster of guests leaned in. "It is Lady Pettigrew's debt, and the names of the men she has been paying." The Duchess's fan stilled. The cluster of guests froze. Lady Pettigrew across the room went suddenly pale. Cordelia's pulse rolled. Adrian continued, calm as ice. "Tonight, the Ton applauded charity. In truth, it applauded trafficking." A ripple of shock moved through the room like a wave. Lady Pettigrew's mouth opened in a laugh too brittle to be real. "Ridiculous," she called. "My lord, you're drunk on your own drama." Adrian turned his gaze to her. "I am sober, and I am bored of your lies." He lifted the ledger. "Gentlemen," he said, voice steady, "if you would like to see your names beside your payments, I am happy to read them aloud." Silence. Then a chair scraped. A lord shifted, face blanching. A woman's fan snapped shut like a weapon. Lady Pettigrew's eyes went wild. "You cannot do this," she hissed. Cordelia's voice, quiet, clear, cut through the room. "Oh, but we can," she said. All heads turned. Cordelia stepped forward. She felt the room's gaze land on her like rain, cold, judgmental, and yet she did not flinch. "London, you adore a scandal because it allows you to feel innocent while you watch someone burn." Murmurs rose. Cordelia continued, voice tightened with truth. "This auction was not charity. It was a market, and I was not the first girl offered. I will not be the last unless you stop applauding and start seeing." The Duchess's smile faltered. Lady Pettigrew's face twisted with fury. "Ungrateful little—" Adrian's voice cut in, quiet and dangerous. "Careful," he said. "You're speaking in front of witnesses now." Lady Pettigrew lunged forward, desperate, reaching for Cordelia's arm, and then the second twist landed, hard. A young girl stepped out from behind the curtain near the musicians, Eliza Rowan, her face white, her hands shaking. In her fist, a folded letter. Eliza's voice trembled, but she spoke anyway. "She told me," Eliza said, eyes on Cordelia. "She told me what Lady Pettigrew planned, and I found this in her desk." Eliza held up the letter. The Duchess leaned forward. The room leaned forward. Adrian took the letter, unfolded, and read once. His expression changed, just slightly. Then he looked up and said clearly, "This is an agreement." Lady Pettigrew's mouth caught. "To sell Eliza Rowan for the sum of 600 guineas. The room erupted. Lord Haversham turned the color of sour milk. Women gasped behind fans. Men stared at their shoes as if the floor might swallow them. Lady Pettigrew hissed, "Lies!" Cordelia stepped closer to the Duchess, voice calm as a death sentence. "Your Grace," she said softly, "if you permit this, the ton will speak of you forever." The Duchess's eyes narrowed. She liked being spoken of. She did not like being blamed. She lifted her chin. "Guards," she snapped. 2 men moved forward at once. Lady Pettigrew's face went white. "Wait!" she began. Cordelia watched, not with triumph, but with something sharper, relief. Lady Pettigrew was seized. Her shrieks broke the ballroom's elegance like glass. "You cannot! I raised you! You owe me!" Cordelia's voice remained quiet. "I owe you nothing," she said. Lady Pettigrew's eyes went feral as she was dragged away. "You think you've won? You think you're safe?" Cordelia's chest tightened. Lady Pettigrew leaned forward, venom on her tongue. "Ask Lord Blackwell what he paid for your name," she hissed. "Ask him what he really wants from you." Cordelia's blood went cold. Adrian's jaw tightened. The room, hungry as ever, shifted from shock to curiosity, because now the scandal had teeth. Cordelia turned slowly toward Adrian. "What does she mean?" Cordelia asked quietly. Adrian held her gaze, and for the first time uncertainty touched his face. Not guilt, not fear, something worse. Regret. "I was going to tell you," he said. Cordelia's voice steadied. "Tell me now." Adrian's throat worked. He leaned in, low enough that only she could hear. "I bought your name," he murmured. Cordelia froze. "My name?" Adrian's eyes held hers, raw now. "Cordelia Wren," he said, "is not the name you were born with." Cordelia's stomach dropped. "You don't know that?" Adrian's gaze didn't waver. "I do," he said, "because I paid a magistrate to find out who you really are." Cordelia's pulse roared. The ballroom blurred. Eliza's hand found Cordelia's, trembling. "Cordelia," Eliza whispered. Cordelia couldn't feel her fingers. Adrian's voice was quiet, almost pained. "Your real name," he said, "is Cordelia Hart." Cordelia felt her world tilt. Hart. A name attached to a scandal from years ago, whispers of a girl stolen from a noble house, a child taken in the night, a family ruined by rumor. Cordelia's lips parted. "No," she breathed. Adrian's gaze softened. "Yes," he said, "you are the missing daughter of the Earl of Fenwick." Cordelia's lungs refused to work. The Earl of Fenwick was one of the most powerful men in England, a man who had lost a child and turned bitter enough to break anyone who reminded him of it. Cordelia's vision swam. "You," she whispered, "you brought me here to expose me?" Adrian's jaw clenched. "I brought you here to save you," he said. Cordelia's voice sharpened. "By ripping my life open in front of London?" Adrian's eyes burned. "I was going to return you to your family, quietly, safely, but Lady Pettigrew moved faster than I anticipated." Cordelia's pulse thundered. "So your kindness is strategy. Your rescue is a plan." Adrian's face went still. Then he said the only honest thing in him. "Yes." Cordelia's chest tightened. Adrian continued, voice lower now. "I wanted to give you back what was stolen," he said. "And I wanted," his gaze flicked to her mouth, then back to her eyes, like a man punishing himself for desire. "I wanted to know you." Cordelia's throat burned. "You had no right," she whispered. Adrian's voice went rough. "I know." The ballroom watched like wolves in silk. Cordelia felt London's eyes on her, waiting to see whether she would collapse into the role they preferred, a girl saved, a girl grateful, a girl quiet. Instead, Cordelia lifted her chin. She turned to the room, and she spoke. "If I am Cordelia Hart," she said clearly, "then I have spent my life being stolen from." The room went still again. Cordelia's voice did not shake. "I will not be stolen again," she said. She turned to Adrian. Her eyes were bright with anger and something worse, truth. "You may have saved me tonight, but you do not own the story of who I become." Adrian's gaze held hers, raw now. "Then tell me," he murmured, "who do you become?" Cordelia inhaled, steadying herself. "A woman," she said softly, "who chooses." Then she did the most unexpected thing of all. She offered Adrian her hand. Not forgiveness, not surrender, a test. "If you want to stand beside me," she said, "you will do it without controlling me." Adrian stared at her hand as if it were a blade offered hilt first. Then he took it, reverent, careful, not claiming, choosing. And the third twist landed, quietly, devastatingly. The Duchess of Maromont rose from her chair and said loudly enough for the ton to hear, "Invite the Earl of Fenwick." The room exploded in whispers. Cordelia's stomach dropped, because if her father arrived tonight, London would not merely watch, London would feast. Adrian's grip tightened around her fingers. Cordelia turned to him, voice low. "What do I do?" Adrian's eyes softened. "For once," he murmured, "you tell the truth before they weaponize it." The Earl of Fenwick arrived like winter, silver hair, dark eyes, a face carved by old pain. When he entered, the ballroom fell silent as if the air itself feared him. His gaze swept the crowd, searching. Then it landed on Cordelia. His body went still. For a moment, the man looked broken. Then anger returned like armor. "You," he said, voice hard. Cordelia stepped forward, heart steady only because she forced it. "My lord," she said. Fenwick's jaw clenched. "You dare stand in a ballroom after what was done to my family?" Cordelia's throat tightened. "I did not do it," she said clearly. Fenwick's eyes narrowed. "You wear my daughter's face." Cordelia's breath trembled, but she did not bend. "I wear it because it's mine." Murmurs rose. Fenwick stepped closer, voice sharp. "Prove it." Cordelia looked around the room at all those watching mouths, those hungry eyes, those fans fluttering with anticipation. Then she did something elegant, scandalous, and strangely modern. She refused to perform pain for their entertainment. "No," Cordelia said calmly. The room froze. Fenwick blinked, stunned. Cordelia continued, voice steady. "I will not prove myself to a ballroom. I will not bleed in front of strangers so they can decide whether I deserve my own name." Fenwick's throat worked. Cordelia looked him in the eye. "If you want the truth," she said softly, "come tomorrow, alone, no audience." A beat. London held its breath. Then Fenwick did the only thing no one expected. He nodded. "Tomorrow," he said, hoarse. Cordelia's chest rose. She turned away from him, and in that moment she felt Adrian behind her, steady as a wall. She didn't look at him, not yet, because she was not anyone's prize, not even his. The next day, Cordelia stood in Fenwick House, surrounded by portraits that never knew hunger. Fenwick sat across from her, hands clenched. Adrian waited in the hall, not intruding, not controlling, for once giving her the dignity of space. Fenwick's voice broke the silence. "If you are my daughter," he said, "where have you been?" Cordelia's eyes held him. "Surviving," she said. Fenwick's jaw clenched. "Who took you?" Cordelia inhaled. "Lady Pettigrew," she said. "She raised me as a tool. She planned to sell me when I became profitable." Fenwick's face went white. Cordelia continued, voice calm. "And you," she added softly, "did not look hard enough to find me." Fenwick flinched as if struck. He lowered his gaze. For the first time, the powerful Earl looked like a man who had failed. "I searched," he said, voice tight. Cordelia's eyes softened just slightly. "Not enough," she replied. A long silence. Then Fenwick whispered, "I'm sorry." It was not dramatic, it was not pretty, but it was real, and real things change people. Cordelia exhaled, feeling something unlock in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. Fenwick swallowed. "You may return as my daughter, with every protection, every privilege." Cordelia's mouth curved faintly. "And my choices?" she asked. Fenwick hesitated. Then, quietly, "Yes." Cordelia blinked. He added rough, "I will not lose you twice." Cordelia stood. She moved toward the door. Fenwick's voice stopped her, cracking. "Do you hate me?" Cordelia paused. Then she said the truth that carried the story's moral straight into modern day. "I don't hate you," she said softly. "I simply won't shrink to make you comfortable." She left him sitting in silence. Outside, Adrian waited. He looked up as she stepped into the corridor. His eyes searched her face. "Well?" he asked quietly. Cordelia studied him. "You were right," she said. Adrian's shoulders loosened with relief. Cordelia continued, voice steady. "And you were wrong." Adrian froze. Cordelia stepped closer. "You saved me for your own reasons," she said. "You told yourself it was justice, but you also wanted control." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Yes," he admitted. Cordelia's gaze was calm. "Do you still want me?" she asked softly, "now that you cannot manage me like a plan?" Adrian stared at her for a long beat. Then he stepped closer. His voice was low. "I want you," he said, "in whatever shape you choose to be." Cordelia's breath trembled. "That is a dangerous promise," she whispered. Adrian's eyes warmed. "I am a dangerous man," he murmured, "but I am not dangerous to you." Cordelia held his gaze. "And if you ever become dangerous to me," she said quietly, "I will leave." Adrian nodded once. "Good," he replied. "Then I will never deserve you by accident, only by effort." Cordelia's chest rose. For the first time, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Then she held out her hand, not to be owned, to be met. Adrian took it like a vow. He lifted her fingers and kissed her knuckles once, reverent, restrained. Cordelia's eyes closed for half a second, not because she was weak, because she was choosing softness without surrender. Weeks later, the Ton did what it always did. It adjusted. Lady Pettigrew was ruined. The men who bid on girls suddenly remembered urgent travel plans. The Duchess of Marymount pretended she had orchestrated everything for charity. And Cordelia Hart, once Cordelia Wren, walked into society not as a rescued girl, but as a woman with a name, a choice, and the quiet power of a truth spoken before anyone could twist it. At a ball, a matron hissed, "Bought." Cordelia turned her head, calm as ice. "Yes," she replied, "and then I bought myself back." The matron had no answer. Adrian watched Cordelia from across the room, something tender in his eyes that he never offered anyone else. When he approached, he did not claim her. He asked, "May I have this dance?" he said. Cordelia's mouth curved. "Try to keep up," she murmured. And as they moved onto the floor, London watched, furious, fascinated, helpless. Because the most scandalous thing a woman can do is not to be desired. It is to refuse to be owned by the desire of others. And Cordelia Hart had become at last the author of her own life. My loveliest listener of the Ton, if there is something to learn from her, it is this. Never confuse being chosen with being valued, and never mistake rescue for respect. Loveliest listener of the Ton. On the morning her brother sold her, Cecily Holt was standing in the kitchen of Ashmore House trying to rescue a pot of porridge that had already given up on itself. She did not know yet what had been arranged. She would know by nightfall. The north of England in November was not a place that encouraged optimism. The moors stretched in every direction beyond the windows of Ashmore House, vast and pewter-colored and indifferent to human trouble, and the wind that swept across them had a particular quality, as though it had come a very long way and was tired and had no patience for pretending things were fine when they weren't. Cecily had grown up with that wind. She rather liked it. It was the most honest thing in her life. She was 26 years old, which in the estimation of her social world made her approximately the same as expired milk, technically still present, but past the point anyone wished to deal with it. She was slight and brown-haired and had the kind of face that people called sensible when they could not think of anything more flattering to say. Her eyes were the precise gray-green of the moor in winter, and they noticed things. That was perhaps her defining quality and her defining problem. Cecily noticed everything and had the unfortunate habit of being unable to pretend otherwise. She noticed, for instance, that the household accounts had been wrong for months. She noticed that her brother Philip had been riding to Harrogate twice a week and returning each time a little quieter, a little paler, the skin beneath his eyes a little more bruised looking. She noticed the letters he burned in the fireplace. She had said nothing, because Philip was the only family she had left, and hope is a difficult thing to surrender, even when the evidence against it is overwhelming. The suitor arrived on a Tuesday. His name was Lord Anstruther, and he was 53 years old, with the complexion of a man who ate too well and slept too little, and had never in his life been told no by anyone whose opinion he valued. He arrived in a carriage that was somewhat too grand for the state of the road, and he surveyed Ashmore House from the front step with the expression of a man appraising livestock at market, noting the damp on the left gable, the cracked window in the east wing, the general air of a family that had been quietly hemorrhaging money for years and was nearly out. He looked at Cecily the same way. Cecily stood in the drawing room in her second-best dress because her best dress had a tear at the hem she hadn't had the thread to mend, and she smiled the smile she had learned at 12 years old, the one that showed enough warmth to be polite and not enough to be encouraging. Lord Anstruther talked about his estate in Lincolnshire for 45 minutes. He did not ask Cecily a single question. When he left, Philip closed the drawing-room door and told her. The debt was £17,000. £17,000 lost across 18 months at card tables in Harrogate and York, money that had bled out quietly while Cecily managed the household on evaporating accounts and told herself the shortfalls were temporary. Lord Anstruther had bought the debt, all of it, in one transaction. The terms of his generosity were not subtle. Philip could not meet her eyes. He stood by the window looking out at the moors, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders doing something complicated and miserable. "He's not unkind," Philip said. He said you would want for nothing." Cecily was quiet for a moment. "He didn't speak to me for 45 minutes. And I would want for nothing." "Cecily." "I understand," she said. And she did. That was the worst part. She understood the mathematics of it perfectly. She was the solution to an equation she had not been consulted about. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed. She looked out the window at the moors, which looked back at her with their customary gray-green indifference, and she thought. Then she opened her wardrobe, took out her warmest cloak, and began to plan. She left before dawn, not in panic. Cecily did not do things in panic. She left with a small bag containing a change of clothes, what remained of her own private money, 11 shillings and 4 pence, which was not much, but it was hers, and therefore felt like a fortune, and a clarity of purpose that surprised even herself. She did not know exactly what she was looking for. She knew only what she was not willing to be. The village of Carswick was 4 miles south across the moor, down a track that in November required serious commitment. The cold was the kind that entered through the soles of your boots and worked upward through your bones with methodical thoroughness. The sky was the flat white of a page that hadn't been written on yet. Cecily walked with her head down and her thoughts very loud. She had one chance at this. Whatever she decided in the next few hours would determine the shape of the rest of her life. She was under no illusions about what running away meant. It meant scandal. It meant the already thin thread of her social position snapping entirely. It meant a future that was genuinely uncertain in ways that should have been terrifying. She found she was not terrified. She found, in fact, that the cold air and the open moor and the simple act of walking somewhere of her own choosing felt more like freedom than anything she had felt in years. She smelled the farm before she saw it, wood smoke and turned earth, and the particular clean, cold smell of animals kept well. It sat back from the track behind a stone wall, low and solid, and built the way things in this part of England are built, without vanity, with the single intention of surviving whatever the moor sent at them. A man was repairing the wall itself, stacking limestone with the unhurried concentration of someone for whom this was the day's primary business, and he saw no reason to rush it. He was somewhere past 30, broad through the shoulders, wearing a coat that had seen considerable weather. His hands were bare despite the cold, and very capable looking. He had not heard her approach. Cecily stopped on the track and watched him for a moment, trying to arrange her thoughts into something that would not sound completely unhinged. She could not manage it. The thoughts remained unhinged. She decided to speak anyway. "Excuse me." He looked up. His eyes were dark, the particular dark brown that was almost black, and they were sharp in a way that felt inconsistent with dry stone wailing. He looked at her the way very few men had ever looked at her, as though she was a person and a potentially interesting one, rather than an item to be evaluated.
"You've come a long way," he said. It wasn't a question. He had clocked the mud on her hem, the bag over her shoulder, the purposeful set of her jaw. He was, Cecily noted, a man who also noticed things. "Yes," she said, "I have a proposition." He set down the stone he was holding with the care of someone who had learned not to drop things. "Tell me." She told him plainly, the way she did everything, her brother's debt, Lord Anstruther, the mathematics of her situation, what she needed, not rescue, she was very clear on this, but a transaction, a legal marriage to someone her brother's creditors could not reach her through, someone who had no connections to her world and therefore no stake in returning her to it. "In return," she said, "I can work. I can cook adequately, keep accounts better than adequately, and I don't complain. I'm not asking for love. I'm asking for a door that locks from the inside." The man was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved through the dry grass at the edge of the track. "A door that locks from the inside," he repeated. "Yes, that's a very specific thing to want. It's the only thing I've ever wanted," Cecily said. "I've simply never been in a position to say so out loud before." He looked at her for a long time. It was not the measuring look of Lord Anstruther. It was more like the look of a man working out whether a thing he'd just encountered was as real as it appeared. "My name is Thomas," he said finally. "Thomas Granger. Cecily Holt. Miss Holt." He picked up his stone again, turned it once in his hands. "I'm going to say something honest, and I'd like you to hear it before you make any decisions. Please." "You're frightened," he said, "but you're not running blind. Those are different things. Most people who arrive at a stranger's doorstep with propositions are doing one or the other. You seem to be doing neither, which is either very brave or very dangerous, and I haven't worked out which yet." Cecily felt something in her chest that she could not immediately name. "Possibly both," she said. Thomas almost smiled. It was the ghost of a smile, there and gone, but it changed his entire face for the second it lasted. "Possibly both," he agreed. "Go inside. There's a fire. I'll finish this section of wall, and then we'll talk properly. Not because I've agreed to anything, but because decisions made in the cold on an empty stomach are usually bad ones." Cecily considered arguing. Then she considered the fire. She went inside. The farmhouse was spare but not stark. Everything in it had been chosen for use rather than appearance, and everything had been maintained with quiet competence, the kind of care that speaks not of wealth, but of a person who respects the things around them. There were books on the shelf by the fireplace, good ones, Cecily noticed, not the decorative kind. She made the tea herself because she found the kitchen without difficulty and the kettle was on the hob, and it gave her hand something to do. Thomas came in 20 minutes later, bringing the cold with him. He washed his hands at the basin, dried them on a cloth, and sat down across from her at the kitchen table with the same unhurried manner he'd had outside, as though a woman turning up at his farm with a marriage proposition was something that required thought rather than alarm. "Tell me about Lord Anstruther," he said. So she did, all of it. The way he'd looked at her, the way Philip had stood by the window unable to meet her eyes, the 17,000 pounds, the 45 minutes of estate talk in which she had not been addressed once. Thomas listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "He bought the debt specifically to leverage it," he said. It was not a question. "Yes. And your brother allowed it. My brother is desperate and ashamed and probably believed he had no other option." She paused. "I'm not angry at Philip. I'm angry at the arrangement. There is a difference." Thomas looked at her with that sharp, considered gaze. "Most people wouldn't make that distinction. Most people haven't had 26 years to observe how these arrangements work," Cecily said.
The anger is easier when it's aimed correctly. A long pause. Outside, the wind found the gap under the door and made itself known. "What you're proposing," Thomas said carefully, "would protect you legally, but it would make your life very small. This farm is not Ashmore House." "Ashmore House is mortgaged to a man who finds me decorative," Cecily said. "I'll take small." Thomas set down his cup. "All right," he said, "but I have conditions." Cecily straightened. "Tell me." "A real marriage, witnessed and legal, nothing that can be unwound when circumstances change." He held her gaze. "Not because I intend to hold you to anything, but because a half measure won't protect you if Anstruther decides to challenge it." "Agreed." "You keep your own money, what you have and what you earn. I won't touch it." "I have 11 shillings. "Then you keep 11 shillings. No flicker of condescension, just fact. Cecily felt that unnamed thing in her chest again, stronger this time. "And the third condition?" she asked. Thomas looked at the fire for a moment, then back at her. "If you ever want to leave," he said quietly, "you leave. No argument, no claim. I won't be a different kind of cage." The room was very still. Cecily thought of Lord Anstruther's appraising eyes, of Philip's averted gaze, of every room she'd ever sat in where the conversation was about her without being with her. "Those are good conditions," she said. "They're the only ones I've got." She held out her hand across the kitchen table. He took it. His grip was warm and steady and did not linger. "Thomas Granger," she said. "Cecily Holt," he said. "I suppose we're being practical together." "I suppose we are." They were married 5 days later in the village church at Carswick on a gray Friday morning when the moor was wrapped in low fog and the church smelled of old stone and candle wax and the faint trace of last Sunday's hymns. Cecily wore her good wool dress, the one with a torn hem, which she had finally mended herself the night before with thread borrowed from the vicar's wife, who had been unexpectedly kind about the whole situation. Thomas wore his best coat, which was clean and well cut and made of better cloth than a farmer had any particular reason to own. Cecily noticed this and filed it away, because she noticed things. The vicar spoke the words. Thomas said his vows with the same measured steadiness he appeared to bring to everything. When he placed the ring on her finger, a simple gold band, plain and without adornment, his hands did not shake at all. Cecily's did slightly. She was grateful he didn't mention it. They walked out of the church into fog so thick that the world ended 20 feet in every direction, which felt, Cecily thought, rather appropriate. The past was behind her, and the future was not yet visible.
And here she was in the middle of it, married to a man she had known for 5 days, which was 5 days longer than she'd known Lord Anstruther before he tried to purchase her. She had written Philip a letter. She had not made it cruel. She had simply told him what she'd done and why, and that she bore him no malice, and that she hoped very much he would find a way through his difficulties that did not involve selling anything else that wasn't his to sell. She had ended it. I love you, and I won't be coming back to be useful to you. That distinction matters. See. She thought he might understand it eventually. She hoped so. The farm had a rhythm to it that Cecily learned the way she learned most things, by paying close attention and not pretending to know more than she did. He showed her things when she asked. He did not show her things she hadn't asked about, which she found deeply respectful. He was not a man who filled silence unnecessarily. He was not a man who performed cheerfulness. He existed in the farmhouse the way the farmhouse itself existed on the moor, solidly, without apology, as though he had always been exactly where he was and saw no reason to be elsewhere. They settled into a careful, companionable distance that felt, unexpectedly, like something she could breathe inside. She took over the accounts within the first week because they were disorganized and it bothered her, and because Thomas watched her do it one evening by the fire with an expression of such visible relief that she understood this had been a source of genuine stress that he had just been managing alone. "You're good at this," he said, watching her work one evening by the fire. "Numbers don't have agendas," Cecily said. "I find them restful." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. It was the warmest sound she had heard in a very long time. It was on the 16th night that she woke to the sound of him in the kitchen. Not a nightmare, she had half expected those, had prepared herself for them the way she'd prepared for other difficult things. Just the sound of him moving quietly in the dark, the scrape of a chair, the small sound of something being set on the table. She pulled her shawl around her shoulders and went to the doorway. Thomas was sitting at the kitchen table with a letter in his hands and an expression she had not seen before. Not distress exactly, the face of a man who has been avoiding something for a long time and has just run out of room to keep avoiding it. He looked up when she heard her. He didn't try to hide the letter. "I owe you something," he said. "I've been working out how to say it." Cecily sat down across from him. She waited, because she had learned that Thomas said things in his own time, and interrupting him only pushed the time further away. He folded the letter, set it flat on the table between them. "My name is Thomas Granger," he said. "That part is true. Thomas Edward Granger." A pause, careful and deliberate. "The Duncarrow estate." The kitchen was very quiet. The fire shifted in the grate. Cecily looked at him for a long moment. "The Duncarrow estate," Cecily said slowly, because she was a woman who grew up in northern England and knew its geography, "is approximately 14 miles from here." 12, Thomas said, as the crow flies. "You own 12 miles of this moor?" "Among other things." Cecily was quiet for a moment. She looked at the letter on the table. She looked at his hands, calloused and capable, the hands of a man who had genuinely been doing this work, not performing it. She thought about the books on the shelf and the quality of his coat and the way he handled everything, people, problems, weight-bearing walls, with a competence that had always felt slightly in excess of what the situation required. "How long?" she asked. 3 years living here, 7 years avoiding the title before that. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "My father was the Marquis of Duncarrow for 31 years. He was very good at it, in the way that men are good at things that require no softness. He managed the estate with complete efficiency, and his family the same way." His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "I inherited at 22. I lasted 8 months before I understood that if I stayed, I would become a version of him that I was not willing to be. So I left." Cecily thought about this. "The letter?" she said, nodding at it. "My solicitor. He writes every quarter, reminds me that the estate is waiting, that there are tenants, obligations. A pause. He's right. I know he's right. I've known for a long time that I can't stay hidden forever. But you've stayed anyway. I've stayed anyway. The fire crackled. Outside, the moor wind ran its fingers along the window pane. Cecily looked at this man she had married for practical reasons, this man who was apparently 12 miles from an estate and had been repairing her wall in the cold because, she understood now, it was the most real thing available to him. "You married me," she said carefully, "knowing that your situation would complicate mine." "I married you," he said, "because you sat across a kitchen table and told me you wanted a door that locks from the inside, and I understood that in a way I haven't understood anything in years." He met her eyes. "I should have told you immediately. I know that. I was—" He paused, and she saw him searching for the honest word rather than the comfortable one. "I was frightened that if you knew, you'd think I was another man trying to manage your life under a different name." Cecily considered this for a long time. "Are you?" she asked. "No," he said it without hesitation. "Everything I told you on that track was true. The conditions I named were real. Nothing about what I've offered you changes because of a title I didn't choose and don't particularly want. But the title exists, yes. And the estate exists, yes. And the tenants—" Thomas let out a long breath. "Yes, and I've been failing them by hiding here. I know that, too." Cecily looked at the letter between them on the table. She thought about Ashmore House and its damp gable and its cracked window and the estate her father had loved and slowly lost. She thought about what it meant to have a duty to people who depended on you and what it cost to carry that well and what it cost to abandon it. She thought about a man who had run from power because he was afraid of what power had made his father. She thought that she understood that fear in a way she had not expected to. "I'm not going to tell you what to do about the estate," she said finally. Thomas looked at her. "But I will say this." She set her hands flat on the table. "Running from a thing because you're afraid of becoming your worst version of it is not the same as choosing not to be that version. You don't have to be your father. You're not him, but you can't prove that by hiding in a farmhouse." The silence that followed was the longest silence Cecily had sat in since she'd arrived. Thomas looked at the letter between them on the table. "That's the most useful thing anyone has said to me in 7 years, he said quietly. "Numbers don't lie, and neither, I find, is the thing you've been avoiding." He looked up at her then, and his face was open in a way she had not seen it before, the particular openness of a person who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has just carefully set it down. "Cecily." "Thomas." "I'd like to go to Duncarrow, not alone." She looked at him across the kitchen table, in the firelight, on a moor that was indifferent to everything except the wind. "I'll keep the accounts," she said. His whole face changed. It was not the ghost of a smile this time. It was the real one, full and sudden and years in the arriving, and it was, Cecily thought, the most unexpectedly fine thing she had seen in a long time. They rode to Duncarrow on a clear December morning when the frost was still on the grass and the moor was briefly, improbably beautiful. It was not a triumphant arrival. Thomas had not ridden ahead. They simply came up the long drive in the old farm cart, which Cecily found she preferred enormously to any alternative she could imagine. The household steward met them at the door with an expression that cycled rapidly through shock, relief, and something that looked very much like the suppressed urge to weep before settling on dignified composure. "My lord," he said. "Hargreaves, this is Lady Duncarrow. She'll want to see the household accounts." Cecily looked at the man she had married who had just, without drama, without ceremony, given her a title she had not asked for and a purpose she was entirely prepared to use. She looked at Duncarrow House, which was large and old and clearly in need of someone who treated numbers as friends rather than enemies. She thought of Lord Anstruther's appraisal eye and how thoroughly irrelevant that now was. She thought of Philip somewhere back at Ashmore House, figuring out what he'd lost by trying to sell what wasn't his. She thought of a track across a frozen moor and a man stacking stone in the cold and the particular quality of a person who notices things. "I'll want to start today," she told Hargreaves. Hargreaves, to his eternal credit, simply nodded. Lord Anstruther made one attempt to challenge the marriage. His solicitor wrote a letter. Thomas's solicitor wrote back a letter that was brief and very precise and apparently contained enough legal weight to settle the matter entirely because there was no second letter. Philip wrote to Cecily in January. It was a short letter and not entirely coherent, but it contained the sentence, "I think I understand now what you meant." She wrote back. She sent him the name of a man in York who helped people with gambling debts renegotiate them to something survivable. She did not offer money. She had learned that some problems had to be faced rather than bought away from. She thought Philip was beginning to learn this too. The Duncarrow accounts took 3 months to fully untangle, and Cecily untangled them with the focused satisfaction of a woman doing work she was genuinely built for. Thomas managed the estate with a seriousness that surprised the tenants, who had expected after so many years either a ghost or a tyrant. He was neither. He was simply present and competent and fair, and gradually the surprise gave way to something that looked a good deal like relief. He was not his father. He was discovering this slowly, the way people discover true things, through the accumulation of small evidence over time, rather than through grand revelation. Cecily watched this happen and said nothing about it, because some things are better witnessed than narrated. It was on a Tuesday evening in April that Thomas came in from the fields to find Cecily at the library desk, surrounded by papers with ink on her fingers and her hair escaping its pins, and an expression of complete absorption on her face. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked up. The Eastern tenancies have been undercharged for 4 years, not catastrophically but significantly. If we adjust the rents to market rate gradually, 3 years, not all at once, we recover the shortfall and no one goes under. "Show me," Thomas said. He pulled a chair up beside her, not across from her, beside her. And she showed him, and he followed it, and they talked through it together, and at some point the conversation moved from rents to the question of the Northfield drainage, and from there to the book she had been reading, and from there to something he had seen on the moor that morning, and the evening went on in the way that evenings go when neither person is in a hurry for them to end. Later, when the candle had burned low and the papers were set aside, Thomas looked at her in the candlelight with an expression she had come to recognize, that open, unguarded look, the one he reserved for moments when he had decided to stop being careful. "I want to say something," he said. "Say it. I came to this arrangement because you asked the right question in the wrong order." Cecily tilted her head. "I'm not sure I follow. You asked for a practical solution, and I gave you one because it was what I had, but somewhere in the middle of the practical solution," he paused and she saw him being precise, as he always was, choosing the exact word rather than the approximate one. "I stopped thinking of it as a solution and started thinking of it as just my life, the one I actually want, which I didn't expect, and which I think you should know." The library was very quiet. The fire had gone low. The moor outside the window was dark and endless and entirely indifferent to the 2 people inside. Cecily looked at this man who had been hiding in plain sight on land he owned, repairing walls against a wind that had no regard for titles, who had given her conditions rather than promises and kept every one of them. who had told her the hard truth in a cold kitchen in the middle of the night because he respected her enough to not let it fester. She thought about what it meant to choose someone for practical reasons and find the practical reasons still intact and something else present as well, something that had nothing to do with practicality and everything to do with the specific texture of a particular person's honesty. "I know," she said. Thomas blinked. "You knew?" "I notice things," Cecily said. "It's my defining quality."
The real smile came again. She was getting used to it now, the way it transformed his face, suddenly, completely, like a Moor in the moment the cloud moves off and the whole landscape changes its color. "And?" he said. "And," she said, "I stopped thinking of it as an arrangement sometime in February. I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure you were ready to hear it." "I wasn't," Thomas admitted. "I know. I waited." "You're very patient." "I'm practical," Cecily said. "The distinction is important." He laughed then, fully, unexpectedly, and it was the best sound in the room. He reached across the desk and took her hand, the way he had taken it the first time, across a kitchen table in a farmhouse that was apparently 12 miles from an estate he owned, warm and steady and without ceremony. This time, she didn't let go. By summer, the eastern tenancies had been adjusted and the north field drained and the household accounts organized into a system so clear that Hargreaves, who had been managing the Duncarrow books for 20 years with increasing desperation, told his wife it was like watching someone let light into a room he'd forgotten had windows. Philip came to visit in June. He was thinner and quieter and had the look of a man who had recently had a very uncomfortable conversation with himself and was still working through the implications. He shook Thomas's hand with a formality that bordered on comical. He told Cecily the house looked well. She told him he looked better. She meant it. He stayed for a week. On the last evening, he sat with her in the garden and said, "I'm sorry." And she said, "I know." And they sat for a while in the comfortable way of siblings who love each other despite everything, which is perhaps the most durable kind of love there is. Lord Anstruther, it was later reported, had found another way to solve his financial difficulties, though the details of that arrangement were not ones anyone cared to repeat in polite company. No one expressed much surprise. On a morning in August, Cecily stood at the window of the Duncarrow library, her library now in any meaningful sense, and looked out at the moor. It was one of its good days. The heather was in bloom, purple in every direction to the horizon, and the light was doing something generous with it, turning the whole landscape into something very nearly optimistic. Thomas appeared beside her. He had been out since before she woke. She'd heard him leave, and he smelled of the outside, of grass and stone, and the particular clean air of a high moor morning. He didn't say anything. He stood beside her and looked at the same view. This was one of the things Cecily had come to love about him, though she would not have used that word in February and might have hesitated even in April. The ability to stand next to a person and not fill the space with noise, to simply exist beside someone as a choice rather than a performance. "It's a good view," she said. "It is." "You own it." "We own it too." She looked at him. He was looking at the moor with the expression of a man who has spent a long time at war with something and has finally not surrendered to it but come to terms with it, who has found that the thing he feared becoming was never the inevitable destination he thought it was, that there was another way through if you were willing to be honest about what you were running from and why.
Cecily thought about what it meant to arrive somewhere by accident and find it was exactly where you needed to be. She thought about 11 shillings and 4 pence and a frozen moor track and a man stacking stone in the cold who had looked at her like a person. She thought that freedom was a stranger thing than she'd imagined, not the absence of obligation, but the presence of the right ones. Obligations you had chosen, work that was yours, a door that locked from the inside. A hand that when it found yours was not claiming anything, just choosing. She took his hand. The moor went on in every direction, enormous and old, and entirely indifferent to human happiness, which somehow, on this particular August morning, made the happiness feel more real. My loveliest listener of the ton. If there is something to carry from Cecily's story, it is this. Running away is not the same as running toward, but sometimes, if you run with your eyes open, the two become the same journey. Cecily did not find freedom because someone saved her. She found it because she saved herself first, and then chose with full knowledge and both hands to let someone stand beside her while she did. Until next time, may you always know the difference between a cage and a door that locks from the inside.
London, 1862. The fog lay thick along Piccadilly, turning the gas lamps into blurred halos, as though the city itself wished to look innocent. Inside Lady Ashcomb's townhouse, innocence was not on the menu. The drawing room glittered with satin and candlelight. Women laughed behind fans. Men spoke with the careful warmth of people who never meant what they said. Near the hearth, half shadowed by a tall palm, stood Mrs. Eleanor Blythe, 39, not unmarried, worse, widowed. And not the gentle kind of widow who sobbed prettily and faded into the background. Eleanor's widowhood was inconvenient. Her husband had died 5 years prior in a factory accident on the Thames, an explosion that newspapers called unfortunate and some people called deserved. The truth was never decided in court, only in drawing rooms. Eleanor wore dove-gray silk, modest and severe. She did not wear mourning any longer, but society still insisted upon treating her as though she were draped in it. Her expression was calm, her hands were steady. That steadiness irritated people. A voice floated from behind her. Poor Mrs. Blythe. It's said she reads ledgers as other women read poems. A soft laugh. Then perhaps she should marry a bank. Another laugh sharper. And I hear she refused Lord Harrenby. She refused him? Well, he refused her first, but one must allow a widow her illusions. Eleanor did not turn. She had learned a certain skill over the years, the skill of letting cruelty pass through her as though she were glass. Lady Ashcombe approached, smiling like a woman presenting a gift she did not particularly enjoy giving. Mrs. Blythe, she said, laying a light hand upon Eleanor's sleeve, how very good of you to come. You look composed. Composed, that word always meant too much. Thank you, Eleanor replied evenly. Your party is as lively as ever. Ah, Lady Ashcombe's smile tightened. Do try to enjoy yourself. I fear you have quite a reputation for seriousness. Before Eleanor could answer, the conversation in the room shifted. The tone changed, like a violin string being tightened. A butler's voice cut through the chatter. Mr. Silas Hawthorne. Eleanor's breath caught, just slightly. Silas Hawthorne had no title, which meant in the eyes of the ton he had no right to command a room. And yet he did. He entered with the quiet assurance of a man who did not ask permission to exist. He was perhaps 34,
tall and lean, dressed in black evening coat without excessive ornament, as though he had chosen restraint as a weapon. His hair was dark, his expression composed, and his eyes, steady, watchful, swept the room as if noting exits. People did not smile at him the way they smiled at dukes. They looked at him the way they looked at storms, with interest and caution. "Who invited him?" someone whispered. "He is a manufacturer," murmured another, almost spitting the word. "Rail and steel. He owns half the new lines out of Birmingham. And yet he speaks as though he owns the old world as well." Eleanor watched him cross the room with the strange sensation that the evening had begun to tilt. Silas Hawthorne paused, briefly, by the hearth, exchanging polite words with Lady Ashcombe. Then, as though drawn by a thread, he turned and walked directly toward Eleanor Blythe. The room noticed. The room always noticed when something crossed the invisible border between acceptable and dangerous. He stopped before her. "Mrs. Blythe," he said. His voice was calm, yet it carried, not loud, just certain, like a door closing. Eleanor inclined her head. "Mr. Hawthorne." "I wonder if you would do me a kindness," he said. Eleanor's eyebrows lifted a fraction. "That depends upon the nature of it." Silas's gaze held hers, direct enough to be startling, not so direct as to be improper. "Come to the window," he said quietly, "for 1 minute." Eleanor did not move. "I beg your pardon?" Silas's mouth curved, but not into a smile, more like a private thought. "I can feel the knives being sharpened behind your back," he murmured, still low enough that only she could hear. "And I am in no mood to allow it." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "You mean to rescue me?" she asked softly, half mocking. "I do not rescue women," he replied. "I choose them." And then he offered his arm, in full view. Eleanor's throat went tight. One refusal would be proper, a second would be safe, but something in his eyes made her stand. She placed her hand lightly on his sleeve, and at that precise moment, London society leaned in, as though a play had begun and they had paid dearly for their seats. Silas guided Eleanor through the crowd as though the room belonged to him. At the tall front windows, fog pressed against the glass like a curious face. Below, carriages and street lamps blurred into a soft smear of gold. Eleanor kept her expression steady, but her mind raced. "You realize," she murmured, "that you have just made me the evening's entertainment." Silas looked out at the street. "Better their entertainment than their target." Eleanor studied him. "You are remarkably confident for a man without a title." Silas's gaze slid back to hers. "And you are remarkably brave for a woman they've tried to bury alive." Eleanor's chest tightened at the bluntness. "You do not know me," she said carefully. "Oh, I know enough," he replied. "I know you keep your eyes on the corners of rooms like someone who expects attack. I know you've trained your face not to react when you're wounded, and I know the story they tell about you is not the truth." Eleanor's fingers curled slightly in her glove. "And what story is that?" she asked. Silas's voice lowered. "That you are cold, that you are calculating, that your husband died because he was careless, and that you were convenient." Eleanor's face remained composed, but her stomach went cold. "That is not—" her voice caught. She steadied it. "That is not a story for polite company." Silas nodded. "No, it is a story for cowards." Eleanor stared at him. "Why speak of this at all?" Silas turned fully to face her. "Because the men who killed your husband," he said quietly, "are still earning money from it." Eleanor's breath stopped. That explosion ended her life as she knew it. It ended her marriage. It ended her place in the world. "You cannot possibly know that," she said too quickly. Silas's hand slipped into his coat. He withdrew a small notebook, leather-bound, worn at the corners. He held it out. Eleanor did not take it at once. Her eyes stayed on his. "What is that?" "A ledger," he said. "A private one, not meant for respectable eyes." Eleanor's throat dried. "And why show it to me?" Silas's gaze did not waver. "Because you are the only person in this city," he said, "who can read what is written in it and live." Eleanor's mind refused to settle. "A ledger," she repeated, "and you believe I can interpret it?" Silas nodded. "Your husband kept impeccable accounts. He was known for it. And you," his eyes flicked to her hands, "you have the hands of someone who writes often." Eleanor stiffened. "Many women write." "Not like you," he said. "You have the stillness of a person who calculates consequences." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "You speak as though you admire calculation." "I admire survival," Silas replied, "and I admire the sort of intelligence that is punished because it does not smile enough." Eleanor's feel the room behind them shift again, laughter rising, a fresh wave of whispers. Lady Ashcomb's guests were peering in their direction, pretending not to watch. Eleanor lowered her voice. "If you have evidence of wrongdoing, take it to the authorities." Silas's expression barely changed. "And which authorities do you imagine are unpurchased?" Eleanor's silence answered him. Silas continued, calmer still. "There are men in Parliament who dine on the money that killed your husband. There are men in the city who drink champagne from it." Eleanor swallowed, her pulse loud in her ears. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Silas's eyes held hers. "I want you to read the ledger," he said, "and I want you to tell me who is in it. And then, Silas replied, "I will burn them down." Eleanor stared at him, half shocked. "You speak of ruin as though it's a hobby." Silas's mouth curved faintly. "For some men it is." Eleanor exhaled, slow. "And what do I gain by aiding you?" Silas looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "Your name back." Eleanor's breath caught again. He continued, as though he knew exactly where to press. "They have made you a widow and a villain," he murmured. "You deserve to be neither." Eleanor's fingers tightened around her fan. "And the price?" she asked. Silas's gaze flicked to the room, then back.
"You will stand beside me," he said, publicly, without flinching. Eleanor felt the trap spring. If she agreed, the gossip would become a storm. Her fragile peace would shatter. Every door that still opened for her would close. And yet, there was something in Silas Hawthorne that made retreat feel like a kind of death. "I do not understand," Eleanor said carefully. "Why do you need me beside you?" Silas's voice became even softer. "Because when the fire comes," he said, "they will call me a brute and a madman, but they cannot dismiss you so easily." Eleanor's mouth went dry. "You want me as your shield." Silas looked directly at her. "No," he said, "I want you as my proof." A beat. Outside, a carriage rolled past, wheels hissing on wet stone. Eleanor looked down at the ledger, and then she took it. That night, Eleanor returned to her townhouse in Bloomsbury with the ledger hidden beneath her cloak. She sat at her writing desk until the candles guttered low. The pages were not ordinary accounts. They were coded. Names reduced to symbols, payments disguised as repairs, dates marked with odd little notations like musical time. Eleanor's mind, sharp, patient, long underused, began to move. By dawn, she had decoded the first pattern, and when she saw the first real name hidden beneath the cipher, she felt her blood go cold. Lord Harrenby. The very man someone had just laughed about, the man who had once pretended to court her until her husband died and Eleanor became inconvenient. Eleanor stared at the name until her eyes burned. So it had never been an accident, not truly. Her hand trembled, not with weakness, but with rage. At precisely 10 o'clock, her butler announced a caller, Mr. Silas Hawthorne. Eleanor rose, heart hammering. Silas entered her drawing room like the day belonged to him. He looked at her face, really looked, and his voice softened. "You didn't sleep?" "I did not," Eleanor replied, holding up a page, "and I found him." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Eleanor said the name. Silas's expression did not change much, except for a slight tightening of the jaw. "Yes," he murmured, "that would be him." Eleanor's voice went quiet. "This is murder," she said. Silas nodded once. "And blackmail," he added, "and theft, and worse." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Why bring this to me?" she demanded, sudden anger flaring. "Why pull me into it at all?" Silas met her gaze without flinching. "Because you already live inside the consequences. The only difference now is that you may choose what to do with them." Eleanor stared at him. A long beat passed. Then she asked the question that frightened her most. "If we do this," she said softly, "what happens to me?" Silas's voice dropped. "If we do this," he replied, "they will try to destroy you." Eleanor's lips pressed together. "And you?" Silas's eyes held hers. "They have tried," he said, almost casually. "They failed." Eleanor felt something shift inside her, something like fear turning into resolve. "Then we begin," she said. Silas's gaze warmed just slightly. "Yes," he replied, "we begin." Silas did not move in secret. He moved in plain sight, like a man daring the world to blink first. Within a week, invitations arrived, concerts, exhibitions, dinners, and each time Silas Hawthorne appeared with Eleanor Blythe on his arm. Not once did he offer excuses, not once did he retreat when the whispers grew louder. London responded like London always did, with cruelty dressed as curiosity. She has bewitched him. He must be using her. A businessman, how vulgar. A widow, how desperate. Eleanor learned what it meant to be watched not with pity, but with hunger. At the Royal Academy, a woman smiled at Eleanor and said, sweet as honey, "How brave of you to be seen." Eleanor smiled back and replied, "How brave of you to speak." Silas heard. His eyes flicked to hers, and there it was, approval, quiet, dangerous approval. That night, a note arrived at Eleanor's home. No seal, no signature, 3 words only. "Stop digging, widow." Eleanor stared at it without expression. Then she folded it neatly into the fire. Silas arrived at noon, face unreadable. "They'll come for you." Eleanor lifted her chin. "They already have." Silas's gaze shifted, sharp, protective. "I should not have dragged you into this." Eleanor surprised herself. "Yes," she replied, "you should have." Silas blinked. Eleanor continued, voice steady. "I have lived quietly since my husband died, quietly enough that they could pretend I did not exist, quietly enough that they could write their version of my life." Her eyes met his. "I am tired of being written," she said softly. Silas stared at her as though he'd never heard anything more dangerous. His voice dropped. "You are certain?" Eleanor nodded once. "Then we finish it," she said. Silas's expression tightened with something like relief and something like admiration. "Yes," he murmured, "we finish it." 3 days later, Lord Harrenby hosted a luncheon. It was meant to soothe, to control, to prove he was untouched. Silas and Eleanor arrived uninvited. The room fell silent when they entered. Harrenby forced a smile. "Mr. Hawthorne, Mrs. Blythe, what a surprise." Silas's voice was calm. "Not a surprise, a conclusion."
Eleanor stood beside him, hands steady. Silas placed the ledger on the table. Then he did something Eleanor did not expect. He looked at her, only her, and said, clearly so the entire room could hear, "Mrs. Blythe, would you tell them what you found?" Eleanor felt every eye land on her. This was the moment the old Eleanor would have fled. The new Eleanor stepped forward. She opened the ledger, and she began to read. Names, dates, payments, the hidden pattern. The room paled with every line. Hands trembling, Harrenby's face went slack with shock. When Eleanor finished, the silence was enormous. Then Silas spoke. "Now you will confess." Harrenby's laughter was thin. "You cannot compel me." Silas leaned closer. "You forget," he said. "I own the paper your bank uses. I own the rails your coal arrives on. And I own the debts you have been hiding." Harrenby's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes flicked to the faces around him, faces turning away, abandoning him. And in that moment he understood the truth London never admits aloud. They do not care about virtue, they care about victory. Harrenby swallowed, voice cracking. "It was an arrangement," he said hoarsely. "The factory, the insurance, the shares." Eleanor's chest tightened. A confession. Not justice, never perfect justice, but truth. Silas straightened. "Good," he said. "Now you will sign." He slid papers forward. Harrenby's hand shook as he took the pen. Eleanor watched, unmoving, as her husband's death was finally acknowledged as something done, not something that merely happened. When Harrenby finished, Silas turned. He did not address the room. He addressed Eleanor. "Now," he said, voice quieter, "they will attempt to make you ashamed again." Eleanor's throat tightened. Silas took her hand, and in front of everyone, every title, every rumor, every cruel smile, he lifted her gloved fingers and kissed them. A simple gesture, and yet the room reacted as though a cannon had fired. Silas looked at the gathered society and said plainly, "This is the woman you tried to bury. I will not allow it." Eleanor's eyes stung, not with humiliation, with something dangerously close to hope. Later that evening, Silas escorted Eleanor to her carriage. The street was quiet, fog drifting like a curtain. Eleanor stood on the step, cloak drawn close. Silas hesitated, as though the words mattered. "They'll say you did it for me," he said quietly. "They'll say you're my instrument." Eleanor met his gaze. "Let them," she replied. "They will say anything except the truth." Silas's eyes softened. "And what is the truth?" he asked. Eleanor's voice lowered. "The truth is," she said, "that you saw me when it was inconvenient." Silas's breath seemed to catch. "And I am not accustomed to it." Silas stepped closer, just enough that the air warmed. "I am not accustomed," he said, voice rougher now, "to wanting something I cannot buy." Eleanor's pulse kicked. Silas continued, steadying himself. "I can offer you comfort," he said, "influence, protection." Eleanor's mouth curved faintly. "Those are not the things I value most," she said. Silas's gaze held hers. "I know," he murmured. "That is why I value you." A beat. Then, with the clarity of a man who did not play with people, he said, "Marry me." Eleanor froze, not because she did not feel it, because she did. But the terror of happiness is that it asks you to risk everything. Silas watched her carefully. "I do not ask for gratitude," he said. "I ask because I want you at my table, in my home, in my life. I want you to stop bracing for knives." Eleanor's throat tightened. "And if I say yes?" she whispered. "Then London will never forgive it." Silas's mouth curved. "Then London may choke," he said softly. Eleanor stared at him. A long beat. Then she whispered with a strange calm, "I will not be anyone's ornament." Silas nodded once, immediate. "Good," he replied. "I have no use for ornaments." Eleanor's breath trembled. "And I will not be rescued," she added, voice firm. Silas's eyes warmed. "Even better," he murmured, "because I don't want a woman I can rescue." He stepped closer. "I want a woman who can stand beside me while the world shouts," he said, "and not flinch." Eleanor's chest rose. The fog swirled around them like a secret, and Eleanor, who had been dismissed, mocked, softened into a ghost, made her choice. "Yes," she said softly. Then with certainty, "Yes, Silas Hawthorne, I will." Silas exhaled as though he'd been holding his breath for years. He took her hand, not possessive, but reverent, and in the quiet of a London street he kissed her knuckles once, like a vow. They married not in a cathedral, but in a small church with iron-gray stone and a simple aisle. London came anyway. Some came to sneer, some came to witness, some came because they felt the world changing and wanted to say they had been present. Eleanor walked toward Silas with her chin lifted and her heart steady. She did not look down, she did not hurry, she did not apologize for taking up space. Silas waited at the altar, expression composed, except for his eyes, which were unmistakably softened. When the vows were spoken, the room shifted, because even London, cruel as it was, could recognize conviction. After the ceremony, as they stepped out into the cold air, the crowd murmured like a restless tide. A woman hissed, "Widow!" Eleanor paused. Silas's body went still, ready to turn. Eleanor squeezed her hand once. Then she turned to the crowd herself. Not angry, not pleading, simply clear. "I have been a widow," she said, "and I have been blamed, and I have been used as a cautionary tale for women you frighten because they do not beg." The murmuring thinned. Eleanor continued, "But I am finished being your warning. I am now my own story." Silas's grip tightened around her fingers. Eleanor turned back to him, and together they stepped into their carriage, into a life that did not require permission. Behind them, London could whisper. Ahead of them, there was breath, space, and something rare. A future earned. Loveliest listener of the Ton. On the night Miss Helena Winters decided to ruin herself, she wore her mother's pearls and her sharpest smile. She was 24, dangerously close to being called a spinster by the women who counted such things. Her hair was honey-colored, her figure acceptable, her dowry modest but respectable. She possessed a quick mind that she'd learned to hide, and a tongue that occasionally forgot to stay hidden. In short, she was exactly the kind of woman society wanted to marry off quickly before she became inconvenient. Tonight, at the Pemberton ball, she intended to become spectacularly inconvenient. The ballroom glittered with London's finest, crystal chandeliers casting diamonds of light across silk gowns and polished floors. The air smelled of roses and champagne and the particular scent of ambition that always hung over a successful season. Helena stood near the refreshment table, watching, waiting. Across the room, Lord Edward Thorne moved through the crowd like a man who owned every space he occupied.
31, devastatingly handsome in the classical way, golden hair, blue eyes, the kind of face that made women forget they were supposed to be demure. His title was old, his fortune immense, his reputation complicated. The heartbreaker of Mayfair, the gossips called him, not because he seduced women, but because he proposed to them with perfect sincerity, then vanished to his country estate for months while the women were left to explain away the almost engagement to society. He never spoke ill of them, never confirmed or denied the proposals, simply let them twist in the uncertainty while he remained untouchable. It was cruel in a way society pretended not to notice because Lord Thorne was too wealthy to condemn. Helena had watched him do it to her cousin Beatrice last summer. She had held Beatrice while she cried, listened to her blame herself, watched her light dim. And Helena had decided someone needed to teach Lord Edward Thorne what it felt like to want something he couldn't have. She just hadn't expected that someone would be her. Lord Thorne's eyes find hers across the room, a flicker of interest that made her stomach tighten with something that felt dangerously like anticipation. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned away. The first rule of hunting a predator: never let them know you're hunting them. Within 10 minutes, he was beside her. "Miss Winters," his voice was warm honey over gravel, "you're looking particularly thoughtful this evening." Helena turned, arranging her expression into polite surprise. "Lord Thorne, I was just considering whether the lemonade here tastes different from the lemonade at Lady Hartwell's last week. I believe it might be slightly bitter." His mouth curved. Discussing lemonade, how refreshingly honest. "Would you prefer I discuss the weather, or perhaps compliment your cravat, though I suspect you've heard quite enough about your appearance already this evening?" Something shifted in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or interest. "Most women find it safer to flatter me," he said. Helena met his gaze directly. "I'm not most women, my lord, and I don't find safety particularly interesting." A lie. She was terrified. Her heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. But fear was just another thing she'd learned to hide. Lord Thorne leaned slightly closer, and she caught the scent of sandalwood and something darker. "Then what do you find interesting, Miss Winters?" Helena considered him for a long moment. "Chess," she said finally. "I find chess interesting. The way each piece has its purpose, the way a game can shift entirely in a single move, the way the most powerful piece on the board is often the one no one sees coming." Lord Thorne's eyes gleamed. "Are we still discussing chess?" he asked softly. Helena smiled, slow and deliberate. "Were we ever, my lord?" And there it was, the spark, the challenge, the moment a man like Edward Thorne decided he wanted to win. He spent the next hour at her side. Not obviously, that would have been too gauche, but he returned to her between dances, brought her champagne she didn't ask for, made observations about the room that were just cutting enough to make her laugh despite herself. He was good at this, brilliant even, making a woman feel like the only person worth speaking to in a room of 200. Helena felt the trap of it, the seduction of being seen by someone who looked like he did, who spoke like he did. She understood suddenly how her cousin had fallen, but Helena had spent 3 months preparing for this, reading about Lord Thorne, learning his patterns, understanding that what he wanted most was a woman who challenged him just enough to be interesting, but not enough to be threatening. She intended to be both. "Walk with me," Lord Thorne said, as the orchestra struck up another waltz. "The gardens are particularly lovely tonight." It was a test. A proper young lady would refuse. The gardens at night meant privacy, meant reputation risk, meant danger. Helena set down her champagne glass. "Lead the way, my lord." His eyebrows rose slightly, surprised again. Good. She wanted to keep him off balance.
They slipped through the terrace doors into the cool night air. Paper lanterns hung from the trees, casting soft amber light across manicured paths. The music from the ballroom followed them, distant and dreamlike. Lord Thorne walked beside her, hands clasped behind his back. "You're not what I expected," he said. "And what did you expect?" I asked. "Someone more cautious. Your reputation suggests you're rather bookish and serious." Helena glanced at him. "I am bookish and serious. I'm also capable of walking in a garden without fainting from the scandal of it." Lord Thorne laughed, a real laugh startled out of him. "Tell me, Miss Winters, why did you agree to this? You must know what people will think if we're seen alone." Helena stopped walking. They'd reached a secluded corner where the lantern light barely reached. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "I wanted to know if the rumors about you were true." His expression shifted, something dangerous flickering across it. "And what rumors are those?" Helena stepped closer, her heart racing. "That you're a man who collects hearts like trophies, that you make women believe in forever, then leave them with nothing but questions." Silence. Lord Thorne's jaw tightened. "And if the rumors are true?" he asked quietly. Helena held his gaze. "Then I suppose I wanted to understand what makes a man do that, what he's running from, what he's afraid of." For a moment, Lord Thorne looked like she'd struck him. Then his expression shuddered. "You presume much, Miss Winters." "I observe much, my lord." He moved closer, close enough that she could feel his heat, that she could see the way his pupils had dilated in the darkness. "And what have you observed?" he murmured. Helena's breath caught, but she didn't retreat. "That you're drawn to women who need you, who see you as salvation, but the moment they actually want you, not your title, not your money, but you disappear." Lord Thorne went very still. "That's quite a theory." "It's not a theory," Helena said softly. "It's a pattern." His hand came up, fingers brushing her jaw with shocking gentleness. "And you think you have me figured out?" Helena's pulse thundered in her ears. "I think," she whispered, "you're terrified of being known." Something cracked in his expression, something raw and real. Then he kissed her. Not gently, not tentatively. He kissed her like a man drowning, like she was air and he'd been underwater too long. His hand slid into her hair, scattering pins. His other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her against him with a desperation that should have frightened her. It didn't, because Helena kissed him back with equal fury, equal hunger. This was the part she hadn't planned for. The way her body came alive under his touch. The way she wanted to pull him closer even as her mind screamed warnings. The way his mouth tasted like champagne and danger and something addictive she couldn't name. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lord Thorne pressed his forehead against hers. "Helena," he breathed, and hearing her name in his voice did something catastrophic to her resolve. "This was a mistake," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed. Neither of them moved. His thumb traced her lower lip and she shivered. "I should return you to the ballroom," he said. "You should." He kissed her again instead, slower this time, deeper, with a thoroughness that made her knees weak. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with want. "Have dinner with me," he said, "tomorrow. Let me court you properly." And there it was, the moment she'd been orchestrating, the beginning of his pattern. Helena looked at him, at this beautiful, broken man who collected women's hearts because he couldn't trust his own. She should say yes, that was the plan. Let him court her, let him fall, then leave him the way he'd left others. Clean, simple, just. But standing in the garden with her lips still burning from his kiss, with her hair falling down and her careful composure in pieces, Helena realized something terrible. She was falling too. "Yes," she heard herself say,
tomorrow." Lord Thorne smiled, genuine and devastating. He didn't know yet that he was prey, and she didn't know yet that she'd caught herself in her own trap. But London was watching, and London loved nothing more than watching careful people make catastrophic mistakes in the name of love. The game, loveliest listener, had only just begun, and neither player knew who would win. Loveliest listener of the Ton, Lord Thorne's townhouse was exactly what Helena expected: elegant, perfectly appointed, and utterly impersonal. She stood in his drawing room the following evening, studying the marble fireplace while he poured wine with hands that were steadier than hers. "You seem nervous," he observed, crossing to her with 2 crystal glasses. Helena accepted hers, grateful for something to hold. "I am nervous," she admitted. "Dinner alone with a notorious rake. My reputation is hanging by a thread." Lord Thorne's mouth curved. "I sent my household staff away for the evening. No one will know you're here." "That," Helena said dryly, "is precisely what makes me nervous." He laughed, that real laugh again, the one that made him look younger, less guarded. "I promise you, Miss Winters, I invited you here to talk, nothing more." Helena met his eyes over the rim of her glass. "And if I wanted more than talk?" She watched him freeze, watched heat flare in his gaze, watched him struggle for the composure he wore like armor. Good. She wanted him unbalanced, wanted him feeling what he made women feel, that dangerous combination of desire and uncertainty. "Then," Lord Thorne said carefully, "I would remind you that you deserve better than a hurried encounter in my drawing room." "How chivalrous." "How practical," he corrected. "I have plans for you, Helena Winters, plans that require patience." Helena's heart stuttered at the possessiveness in his tone, even as her mind catalogued it as another warning sign. This is how he worked, made women feel chosen, special, until they weren't. "What kind of plans?" she asked. Lord Thorne set down his wine and moved closer until she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I plan to court you properly," he said, "take you driving in the park, send you flowers, dance with you at every ball until society has no choice but to assume my intentions are honorable." Helena's throat tightened. "And are they honorable?" His fingers brushed her cheek, feather light. "I don't know yet," he admitted with devastating honesty. "I only know I can't stop thinking about you, about the way you looked at me in that garden, like you could see straight through me." Helena's breath caught. This was the moment she should pull back, maintain distance. Remember, this was strategy, not seduction. Instead, she leaned into his touch. "What would you do," she whispered, "if I told you I don't want proper courtship, if I told you I want the truth instead, who you really are when you're not performing for society?" Lord Thorne's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through. "The truth is rarely attractive, Miss Winters. Try me." He stared at her for a long moment, warring with himself. Then he stepped back, putting distance between them like it physically hurt. "The truth is, I'm a coward," he said quietly. "I court women who need saving because it's easier than risking someone who might actually see me and choose to leave anyway." Helena's chest constricted. She hadn't expected honesty, hadn't expected him to hand her the very weapon she needed to hurt him. "Why do you do it?" she asked softly. "Why propose and then disappear?" Lord Thorne walked to the window, hands clenched behind his back. "Because the moment becomes real. The moment they start planning the wedding, talking about the future, I panic. I see the rest of my life stretching out, trapped in a marriage built on performance rather than truth, and I run." He turned back to her, eyes blazing. "But you, Helena, you terrify me in an entirely different way. Why? Because you don't need saving, because you look at me like a puzzle to solve rather than a prize to win, because when I kissed you last night, I wanted to keep kissing you until neither of us remembered who we were supposed to be." Helena's pulse roared in her ears. She should feel triumphant. He was falling, exactly as planned. Instead, she felt something far more dangerous: understanding. "I have a confession," she heard herself say. Lord Thorne went still. Helena set down her wineglass with trembling hands. "I didn't meet you by accident last night. I engineered it. I've been watching you for months, learning your patterns, planning how to make me notice you." The silence stretched like broken glass. Lord Thorne's expression didn't change, but something shuddered behind his eyes. "Why?" he asked, voice carefully neutral. Helena lifted her chin. "Because you hurt my cousin Beatrice, because I watched her fall apart after you proposed and disappeared, because someone needed to teach you what it felt like to want something you couldn't have." Another beat of silence. Then Lord Thorne did something unexpected. He smiled. Not a kind smile, a sharp, knowing smile that made Helena's stomach drop. "So you plan to make me fall for you and then break my heart. How deliciously ironic." Helena's throat went dry. "Yes." Lord Thorne crossed back to her with predatory grace. "Tell me, Miss Winters," he murmured, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Tell me, at what point did your plan go wrong?" Helena's breath hitched. "I don't know what you—" "At what point," softly he continued, "did you start falling too?" Helena felt her careful composure crack. "I'm not—" "You are," Lord Thorne interrupted, his hand coming up to cup her face with devastating gentleness. "You're falling, and it's terrifying you because you can't control it, can't strategize your way out of it, can't protect yourself from wanting me." Helena's hands came up to his chest. Whether to push him away or pull him closer, she wasn't certain. "You're wrong." "Am I?" His thumb traced her lower lip, and she shivered. "Then walk away, right now. Tell me this was all a game and leave." Helena stared at him, heart racing. She should walk away, should stick to the plan. But the plan had shattered the moment he kissed her in that garden. "I can't," she whispered. Lord Thorne's eyes darkened with something fierce and tender. "I can't either," he breathed. Then he was kissing her again, but different this time, slower, deeper, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. His hands slid into her hair, cradling her head like she was precious, like she mattered. Helena melted into him, all strategy forgotten. This was dangerous. This was exactly what she sworn not to do. This was falling without a net, and she couldn't make herself stop. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lord Thorne pressed his forehead to hers. "Stay," he murmured. "Have dinner with me. Talk to me. Let me prove I can be more than the man who runs." Helena's throat burned. "And tomorrow, when the fear comes back, then you'll remind me why I'm staying," he said simply, "the way you just did." Helena pulled back enough to see his face. "I'm still angry at you," she said, "for what you did to Beatrice, to those other women." "Good. I deserve your anger. I deserve worse than that. But I'm also angry at myself for wanting you anyway, for kissing you like I'm starving, for being just as much of a fool as they were." Lord Thorne's jaw tightened. "You're not a fool, Helena. You're the first person who's ever truly seen me." "That's what you told Beatrice, too, isn't it?"
Helena asked quietly. "That's what you tell them all." He flinched like she'd struck him. "Yes," he admitted, voice rough. "I did, and I meant it every time. That's what makes me a monster. Not that I lied, but that I believed my own lies just long enough to make them believe too." Helena's chest ached. "So how do I know this isn't another lie?" she whispered. "How do I know you won't disappear the moment this becomes real?" Lord Thorne stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "You don't," he said. "That's the truth, Helena. You can't know. You can only decide if I'm worth the risk." Helena stared at him, at this beautiful, broken man who was finally being honest about his brokenness. "And are you worth the risk?" she asked. Lord Thorne met his eyes, and for once he didn't look confident or charming or controlled. He looked terrified. "I don't know," he quieted, "but I want to be. For the first time in my life, I actually want to try." The clock on the mantel chimed 8. Dinner was waiting in the next room. The rest of London was waiting beyond these walls.
And Helena had a choice to make. Leave now with her heart intact, or stay and risk everything for the chance that he might actually mean it this time. She looked at Lord Thorne's outstretched hand. Then she took it. "One dinner," she said. "But if you lie to me, Edward Thorne, if you perform instead of being real, I walk away and you never get another chance." His fingers tightened around hers. "I won't lie," he promised. "We'll see," Helena murmured. And as he led her toward the dining room, she caught sight of their reflection in a mirror, two people playing at honesty, both terrified of what would happen when the performance ended and only the truth remained. But that, loveliest listener, was the gamble, because the most dangerous game isn't trying to make someone fall in love with you. It's falling in love yourself while trying to decide if they're capable of catching you. And neither Helena nor Edward knew yet who would break first, or if breaking might be the only way they'd finally become whole. Loveliest listener of the ton. 3 weeks after that first dinner, Helena stood in her bedchamber and stared at the letter in her trembling hands. It had arrived an hour ago, delivered by Lord Thorne's footman. She'd known, the moment she saw the seal, that everything was about to change. The letter was brief, devastating in its brevity. "Miss Winters, I find I cannot continue this courtship. My feelings have become complicated in ways I did not anticipate, and I believe it best we part now before either of us is hurt further. Please accept my apologies for any pain this causes. Yours, Edward Thorne." Helena read it 3 times, each word landing like a physical blow. He'd done it. Exactly as she'd known he would. Exactly as he'd done to Beatrice, to the others. Courted her beautifully, made her believe, then vanished the moment it became real. Except this time, Helena had been prepared. This time, she had a plan. Her hands steadied as she set the letter down and reached for the stack of papers she'd been keeping in her desk drawer. 3 weeks' worth of correspondence, notes, observations, evidence. Because Helena Winters had not spent 3 months studying Lord Edward Thorne just to break his heart. She'd studied him to expose him. And tonight, at the Ashford Ball, the largest event of the season, she would do exactly that. The ballroom blazed with candlelight and ambition. Helena arrived fashionably late, wearing a gown of deep sapphire silk that made her look both innocent and dangerous.
Her mother's pearls gleamed at her throat. Her hair was pinned up with calculated simplicity. She looked like a woman who'd been jilted, which, of course, she had been. The whispers started the moment she entered. "That's her, the one Lord Thorne was courting. I heard he ended it just today. Poor thing, another one. She should have known better." Helena kept her chin high and her expression serene as she moved through the crowd, accepting sympathetic looks and barely concealed pity with equal grace. She was looking for one person, and she found him near the card room, surrounded by his usual crowd of admirers, men who envied him, women who wanted him. Lord Edward Thorne, resplendent in black evening wear, laughing at something Lord Pemberton had said. As if he hadn't just destroyed her, as if this was simply another Tuesday. Helena's hands clenched in her skirts, but she didn't approach. Not yet. She had to wait for the right moment, the moment when everyone was watching. That moment came an hour later when the orchestra paused between dances and the Duchess of Ashford called for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Duchess announced, "we have a special entertainment this evening. Miss Helena Winters has requested permission to address the assembly." The room erupted in whispers. Helena stepped forward, heart hammering but steps steady. She could feel every eye on her, could feel Edward's gaze burning into her from across the room. She reached the center of the ballroom and turned to face the crowd. "Thank you, Your Grace," Helena said, her voice carrying clearly. "I promise to be brief." She pulled the folded papers from her reticule. Edward's posture changed, tension rippling through him. "3 weeks ago, Lord Thorne began courting me. He sent flowers, he took me driving, he kissed me in gardens and made promises in drawing rooms." Scandalized gasps. Helena continued calmly. "Today, he ended our courtship with a letter. No explanation, no conversation, just gone." The room was silent now, rapt. "This has happened before," Helena said. 3 times in 2 years. Lord Thorne courts women with extraordinary attention, makes them believe in forever, then vanishes the moment they start to truly care. She held up the papers. "These are letters from those women, accounts of what he did, patterns that repeat." Edward moved forward, face pale. "Helena, Miss Winters," she corrected coldly. "You lost the right to my given name when you treated me like I was disposable." The crowd shifted, sensing blood. Edward stopped several feet away, jaw tight. "You said you wanted honesty," he said quietly, "that you wanted the truth. And you promised not to lie," Helena shot back, "yet here we are." "I didn't lie." Edward's voice was strained. "I told you I was a coward. I told you I might run, and then I did exactly what I warned you I would do." Helena's chest tightened, but she pushed forward. "You broke my cousin's heart. You made her believe she was special, then abandoned her to society's gossip. She still hasn't recovered." Edward flinched. "I know. And I'm sorry. I've been sorry for 2 years, but being sorry doesn't make me less of a coward." Helena's hand shook. "Then why do it again?" she demanded. "Why court me if you knew you'd just run away?" Edward's eyes met hers, and she saw something raw and desperate there. "Because I wanted to be different with you," he said. "I wanted to believe I could be the man you saw in me instead of the man I actually am." The ballroom held its breath. Helena felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "So you used me," she whispered. "You used me to feel better about yourself, and when it got too real, you discarded me like all the others." "No," Edward stepped closer, and the crowd leaned in. "I ended it because I was falling in love with you." The words landed like thunder. Helena's breath caught. Edward continued, voice rough with emotion. I was falling in love with you and I panicked because every woman I've ever cared about has eventually realized I'm not worth the trouble, and I couldn't bear to watch you realize it too. So I left first, before you could. Helena stared at him, mind reeling. This wasn't the script. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. You don't get to do that, shakily, she said. You don't get to make this about your fear when you're the one who hurt people. I know, he said. You're right. I'm making excuses when there are no excuses. I hurt Beatrice. I hurt others, and I hurt you. He took another step closer. But I'm done running, Helena, because standing here, in front of all of London, being exposed for exactly what I am, it's less terrifying than the thought of never seeing you again. Helena's carefully constructed composure began to crack. You sent me a letter, she whispered. You didn't even have the courage to face me. Edward's jaw tightened. I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. He held out his hand. But I'm facing you now, in front of everyone. No more hiding, no more running. Helena looked at his outstretched hand, then at the paper she still held, the evidence she'd gathered to destroy him. She'd planned this moment for months, planned to expose him, humiliate him, make him feel the pain he'd caused others. But standing there, seeing the genuine anguish in his eyes, she realized something that changed everything. Revenge felt nothing like she'd expected. It didn't feel triumphant or satisfying. It felt hollow, because the man in front of her wasn't a monster. He was just broken, and breaking him further wouldn't heal anyone, not Beatrice, not the others, and certainly not herself. Helena lowered the papers. I don't want your apology, she quietly said. Edward's face fell. I want your honesty, Helena continued. Real honesty. Not the performance you gave me over dinners, not the charm you used to keep people at a distance. I want to know who you are when you're terrified, when you're imperfect, when you're real. Edward's throat worked. I'm a man who's afraid of being loved because I don't believe I deserve it. I'm a man who runs because staying requires courage I'm not sure I have. I'm selfish and broken, and I've hurt people because I was too cowardly to hurt myself first. He paused, voice dropping. But I'm also a man who has never felt alive as I did these past 3 weeks with you, who has never wanted to be better until I met someone who made better seem possible. Helena's vision blurred. And if I take your hand, she whispered, if I give you another chance, how do I know you won't run again? Edward's eyes held hers. No charm now, no performance, just raw truth. You don't, he said. That's the risk, Helena. I can't promise I won't be afraid. I can't promise I'll be perfect. I can only promise that if I do run, I'll turn around and come back, every single time. The ballroom was utterly silent. Helena felt London watching, waiting to see what she would choose. Revenge or risk? Safety or love? She looked down at the papers in her hand, at all that carefully gathered evidence. Then she did something that shocked everyone, including herself. She tore them in half. The sound ripped through the silence. I'm not doing this for you, Helena said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. I'm doing this for me because I refuse to become bitter. I refuse to let your fear turn into my weapon. She let the torn papers fall to the floor. But Edward Thorne, Helena continued, voice steady and strong, if you want me, you will earn me, not with flowers or pretty words, with actions, with time, with proof that you mean what you say. Edward's eyes shone. Anything, he breathed. Helena stepped closer, close enough that only he could hear her next words. And if you ever send me a letter ending things again, instead of having the courage to speak to my face, I will destroy you. Not with gossip or exposure. I'll simply walk away and never look back. Do you understand?" Edward nodded, something like awe in his expression. "I understand." Helena held his gaze for a long moment. Then she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, gentle but certain. The ballroom erupted. Some applauded, some whispered, some looked scandalized. Helena didn't care, because she'd come here tonight planning to break a man's heart. Instead, she'd chosen something far more radical. She'd chosen to give him the chance to fix his own. Edward lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt like a vow. "Thank you," he whispered. Helena's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. "Don't thank me yet," she murmured. "You still have to prove yourself, and I promise you, Lord Thorne, I will not make it easy." Edward's eyes gleamed. "Good," he said. "I don't want easy. I want real." And as the orchestra began to play and Edward led her onto the dance floor, Helena realized something profound. Revenge would have been simple. Love was going to be complicated, messy, terrifying. But complicated and messy and terrifying were also real. And real, she was beginning to understand, was worth the risk. 6 months later, on a spring morning that smelled of rain and possibility, Helena stood in her garden and watched Edward plant roses. He'd kept his promise. Not perfectly. There had been moments when she'd seen the fear creep back into his eyes, moments when he'd started to pull away. But each time, he'd stopped himself, turned around, stayed. And slowly, painfully, honestly, they'd built something neither of them knew was possible, a love based on truth instead of performance. Edward looked up from the rose bushes, dirt on his hands, hair falling into his eyes. "You're watching me again," he observed. Helena smiled. "I like watching you do actual work. It's novel." Edward laughed and stood crossing to where Helena sat on the garden bench. "I have something for you," he said. He pulled a small box from his pocket. Helena's breath caught. Edward opened it, revealing a ring, simple gold with a single sapphire. "Helena Winters," he quietly said, "I have been a coward, a fool, and a man who ran from everything good in his life. You gave me the chance to be better, not perfect, but better." His hand trembled slightly as he held out the ring. "Will you marry me? Not the charming version of me, not the performance, the real, flawed, occasionally terrified man standing in front of you." Helena looked at him, at the dirt under his nails, the vulnerability in his eyes, the way he waited for her answer without trying to charm or convince. Real.
Imperfect. Hers. "Yes," she said simply. Edward's face transformed, joy and relief and something deeper flooding through him. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been holding his breath. When they finally broke apart, both laughing, Edward pressed his forehead to hers. "I won't run," he promised. "Not from this, not from you." Helena's fingers traced his jaw. "I know," she said, "because if you do, I'll chase you down and drag you back." Edward grinned. "That's oddly romantic." "That's oddly us," Helena corrected. And it was. Because their love story hadn't been perfect or simple. It had been messy and complicated and built on the ruins of broken plans. But it was real. And real, they'd both learned, was better than any performance could ever be. My loveliest listener of the Ton, if there is something to learn from Helena and Edward, it is this. People will hurt you, sometimes deliberately, sometimes from their own brokenness.
You can choose revenge. You can choose to hurt them back. Or you can choose the harder path, holding them accountable while still leaving room for change. Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve to be the kind of person who doesn't let someone else's fear turn you bitter. Helena could have destroyed Edward. Instead, she gave him the space to destroy his own walls. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a woman can do is not to break a man's heart, but to trust him to fix it himself, even when that trust is terrifying, even when the outcome is uncertain. Because real love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone willing to be imperfect honestly. And that, loveliest listener, is worth every risk.
Loveliest listener of the Ton. London will forgive almost anything. A gambling habit, a cruel remark, an affair if it's conducted with enough elegance to be called unfortunate. But London does not forgive a woman who refuses to be ashamed. They had been waiting for Miss Amara Whitlock to break, waiting the way they waited for storms to finally spill rain, patiently, eagerly, with their mouths already open for the spectacle. Because 3 years ago, a viscount's son fell from a balcony during a masquerade, and Amara was the last person seen with him alive. No charges were ever laid, no proof was ever found, but proof was never London's favorite thing. London preferred a story, and the story was delicious. Amara Whitlock, beautiful, sharp-tongued, too confident for a girl with no real fortune, had tempted a gentleman into the dark, and the dark had swallowed him. So when Amara returned to society in the spring of 1819, the Ton did not greet her like a young lady. They greeted her like a match being struck. Amara moved through Mayfair as though she could not hear them. She had learned early that if you flinch, people lean in harder. Her mother, Lady Whitlock, had trained her with a smile that never trembled and a voice that never begged. "Never give them your fear," Lady Whitlock used to say. "Fear is the only currency they can always afford." Lady Whitlock was dead now, dead quietly, respectably, alone. And when Amara stood beside her mother's grave, she had sworn that if London wanted her to be a villain, she would at least become a villain who won. The problem was that winning required money, and Amara had almost none. The Whitlock estate in the country was mortgaged to the rafters, the London townhouse was rented, servants had been dismissed in careful waves, like grief. She had one remaining asset, a small wooden box of letters her mother had kept hidden behind a false panel in her dressing mirror. Letters sealed with a crest Amara had never seen in her home before, a stag pierced by a sword. And across the first letter, in a hand that looked too disciplined to belong to anyone kind, were the words, "Burn after reading." Amara did not burn them. She read every last one, and by the time she reached the final page, her throat felt like it had been cut. Because the letters weren't love letters. They were proof. Proof that the man who died at the masquerade, Frederick Linton, had been involved in something far uglier than flirtation. Something that had money behind it, men behind it, and one name behind it, repeated like a threat. The Duke of Halewood. The Duke of Halewood did not merely belong to the Ton. He owned it. His balls set the season's tone, his opinion could raise or ruin a family, his signature could buy a magistrate's silence. And Amara Whitlock, already half ruined, had just become dangerous. The invitation arrived the following week, as if London itself had smelled blood. The Duke of Halewood requests the pleasure of your company at his spring house party. 3 days at Halewood Manor, the entire ton gathered under one roof, a polite cage full of predators. Amara read the invitation twice and felt a cold, steady calm spread through her. This wasn't an invitation. It was a test, or a trap, or both. She went anyway, because the letters in her box meant one thing. If the Duke of Halewood wanted her under his roof, it was because he feared what she carried. And fear in men like that always turned violent. Halewood Manor sat beyond London like a carved jewel on the edge of the countryside. Stone pillars, manicured gardens, windows that reflected the sky like blank eyes. The house party began with champagne and laughter too bright to trust. Amara arrived in a black silk traveling gown, not because it was fashionable, but because she wanted to look like a warning. The Duke greeted her personally. Duke Alaric Halewood was handsome in the way a blade was handsome, polished, expensive, and designed to cut. His smile was practiced, his eyes were not. "Miss Whitlock," he said smoothly, "London has missed you." Amara curtsied. "London misses many things, honesty rarely among them." The Duke's smile tightened by a fraction. Interest, annoyance, calculation. "Come," he said, offering his arm. "Let us pretend we are friends." Amara took it, not because she trusted him, because refusing would have made her prey. At dinner that night, the table glittered with silver and cruelty. Every seat was filled with some form of power, marquises and earls, their wives, their daughters, and men who wore politeness like armor. Amara felt eyes on her constantly, watching, measuring, waiting for her to confess something without realizing it. The Duke sat at the head of the table, perfectly at ease, and beside him, on his right, sat a man who looked like he'd been carved out of stormlight. Not a lord, not dressed for attention, but attention bent toward him anyway, as if it couldn't help itself. His name was announced casually, like he didn't matter. Mr. Rowan Cade. Mr. No title, yet the Duke treated him like an equal, which in London meant only one thing: danger. Rowan Cade met Amara's gaze across the candles. His eyes were gray-green, steady, too intelligent to be safe. He didn't smile, he didn't look away, and something in Amara tightened, not fluttering, not girlish, alert. Because men like that didn't attend a duke's house party for entertainment. They attended for leverage. After dinner that night, as the guests drifted toward music and cards, Amara slipped out into the conservatory to breathe. The glass walls were fogged with warm air. Orange trees bloomed quietly. It smelled like sweetness hiding thorns. She had barely touched a lemon tart when a voice came from the shadows between the palms. "You shouldn't eat anything in this house." Amara turned sharply. Rowan Cade stepped into view, hands behind his back like a man trained not to threaten, yet somehow still threatening. "Are you warning me?" Amara asked. Rowan's gaze flicked to her mouth, then back to her eyes. "I'm informing you," he said calmly. "There's a difference." Amara's spine stiffened. "Why?" Rowan took one slow step closer. "Because," he said, "you are here for the same reason I'm here." Amara's blood went cold. "And what reason is that?" she asked softly. Rowan's expression didn't change. "To survive Duke Halewood." Silence. Then Amara laughed once, sharp. "You sound like the Duke is a storm." Rowan's eyes stayed steady. "He's worse," he said. "Storms don't choose to drown."
Amara's fingers tightened around her plate. "If you know so much, then why are you here?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "Because he owns something that was stolen from my family, and I intend to take it back." Amara's heart thudded. She recognized the shape of that sentence. It was the shape of vengeance, and it was dangerous because vengeance could be used like a leash. "Then we have something in common," Amara murmured. Rowan's gaze sharpened. "You're here for answers, not for pleasure." Amara tilted her chin. "And you're here to help me?" Rowan's voice dropped low enough to feel like a confession. "I'm here," he said, "because if you pull the wrong thread, he'll kill you before you reach the end of the tapestry." Amara swallowed hard. "You speak with great certainty." Rowan's eyes darkened. "I've watched him do it before." That night, Amara couldn't sleep. Halewood Manor was too quiet in the way prisons are quiet. Quiet because everything inside was controlled. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling until she heard it, a soft click, a whisper of fabric in the corridor. Amara arose, took the smallest candle, and slipped out barefoot. The house smelled of wax and old money. She followed the sound down a servant's stair, careful, precise, until she reached a door half open. Inside was a private study, and sitting at the Duke's desk, rifling through papers, was Rowan Cade. Amara stepped in without thinking. Rowan froze. Their eyes met. "You!"
"You," Amara whispered. "You're spying." Rowan's gaze flicked to the candle in her hand. "You're doing the same," he said quietly. Amara moved closer, anger hot. "You told me not to eat anything in this house," she hissed. "But you didn't warn me that you'd break into the Duke's study like a criminal." Rowan's mouth tightened. "I warned you the Duke kills people," he said. "That should have implied criminality." Amara's throat tightened. "What are you looking for?" Rowan hesitated. That hesitation was everything. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. Not a love letter, a deed. Amara recognized the crest, the stag pierced by a sword. Her stomach dropped. "That seal," she whispered. "It's on the letters my mother hid." Rowan went still. "Your mother," he said carefully, "kept letters sealed with the Cade crest?" Amara's heart hammered. "Yes." Rowan's eyes narrowed as though the world had shifted. "My family," he said, voice lower now, "has been trying to find those letters for 10 years. Amara's blood went ice cold. "You came from my mother," she whispered. Rowan's jaw clenched. "I came for the truth," he said, "because those letters prove Halewood stole our estate, forced my father into debt, and—" A soft laugh drifted from the doorway. Amara's body went rigid. The Duke stood there, hands clasped behind his back, smiling like a man enjoying theater. "Excellent," Duke Halewood purred. "My house is full of ghosts tonight." Rowan's posture sharpened. Amara's candle trembled slightly. The Duke stepped into the room, gaze on Amara. "Miss Whitlock," he said softly, "you were never meant to wander." Amara steadied her voice. "I prefer not to be contained." The Duke's smile widened. "And yet you are," he murmured. Then his eyes slid to Rowan. "And you," he said pleasantly, "are exactly where I expected." Rowan's voice was calm. "You set this up?" The Duke inclined his head. "I invited her," he said, gesturing to Amara, "because she carries a story that could become inconvenient." Amara's stomach tightened.
And I kept you close, he continued, eyes on Rowan, because you cannot help yourself, Mr. Cade. You were always going to bite. Rowan's jaw tightened. Amara's pulse roared. This wasn't a trap. It was a performance. The Duke turned to Amara, voice velvet soft. "Tell me," he said, "what do you want, Miss Whitlock? Exoneration? Revenge? A confession?" Amara held his gaze. "I want the truth about Frederick Linton, and I want my mother's name out of your mouth." The Duke's eyes gleamed. "Ah," he murmured, "Frederick." He walked to the window and looked out into the dark garden like it entertained him. "Frederick was meant to be useful," he said lightly. "He was meant to deliver a letter and then forget it existed." Amara's blood went ice cold. "And instead?" she asked. The Duke glanced back, expression bored. "And instead," he said, "he threatened to tell the wrong people." Amara's throat tightened. "You killed him." The Duke's smile returned. "No," he said, "I simply removed his footing." Amara's entire body went cold. Rowan's hands curled slowly into fists. "You blamed me?" Amara whispered. The Duke's eyes flickered with genuine amusement. "I didn't have to," he said. "London did it for me. You should be grateful. It was efficient." Amara's vision blurred with rage. She took one step forward, and Rowan moved, instantly, placing himself slightly between her and the Duke, not touching her, but shielding her. The Duke's eyes narrowed, pleased. "How romantic," he murmured. Then he leaned closer, voice like a knife under silk. "You both seem to believe you have leverage, but you've forgotten the first rule of power." He tapped the deed Rowan held. "I own the magistrates. I own the gossip. I own the consequences." Amara's voice shook, but it didn't break. "Then why invite me here at all?" she demanded. "If you own everything, why fear me?" The Duke's eyes went cold. "Because I can't find the letters your mother wrote, and I suspect you can." Amara's stomach dropped. Rowan's gaze snapped to her, and Amara realized the twist she hadn't considered. The Duke wasn't merely protecting himself. He was hunting her. The Duke smiled. "Give them to me," he said, almost kindly, "and I will let you both walk away." Rowan's voice was low and lethal. "And if we refuse?" The Duke's gaze stayed pleasant. "Then you will both become tragedies, very entertaining ones." Amara didn't sleep after that. She returned to her room and sat at her vanity with shaking hands, staring at her reflection. She had come for justice, and instead she had walked into a man's mouth. Rowan's warning echoed in her head. "He'll kill you before you reach the end." A soft knock came to her door. Amara didn't answer. The knob turned, slowly, politely. Her breath caught. Rowan stepped inside. He didn't close the door all the way. A deliberate choice. A declaration. "I will not trap you." Amara's voice was sharp. "You should leave." Rowan's gaze held hers. "You're frightened," he said. Amara laughed once, bitter. "You noticed?" Rowan took one step forward, then stopped at a respectful distance. "I'm not here to frighten you," he said quietly. Amara's throat tightened. "Then why are you here?" she whispered. Rowan's jaw worked as if he were forcing words through pride. "I used you," he admitted. "I didn't know you had the letters, but I suspected you knew something, and I—" Amara's eyes flashed. "You came to steal from me." Rowan didn't deny it. "Yes," he said, "and I'm sorry." Sorry wasn't enough. Amara's voice trembled with rage. "My mother is dead, and the only thing she left me is the truth. You don't get to take that." Rowan's eyes darkened. "I don't want to take it," he said. "I want to help you weaponize it." Amara swallowed hard. "And what do you get?" she demanded. Rowan's gaze didn't move. "I get Halewood destroyed, and I get to stop pretending I don't care if you survive." Amara's breath caught. That was the most dangerous kind of honesty, because it wasn't poetic. It was real. "Don't," Amara whispered. "Don't say that to me, not when you're still capable of leaving." Rowan's voice dropped. "I am capable," he said. "I'm simply choosing not to." Silence. Amara hated how her heart responded to that. She hated how much she wanted to believe him. Rowan reached into his coat and placed something on her vanity. A heavy iron key. "Servants' passage," Rowan said. "It leads to the east wing and the outside garden gate. If the Duke moves against you, you run." Amara stared at the key. "And you?" she whispered. Rowan's jaw tightened. "I'll distract him." Amara's throat burned. "That sounds like martyrdom." Rowan's eyes lifted to Amara's. "It sounds like penance," he said softly. Amara's voice cracked. "I don't want your penance. I want your partnership." Rowan went still. Then, slowly, as if he feared he'd break something fragile, he nodded. "Then we do it together," he murmured. Amara stepped closer, close enough to see the faint scar at his brow, close enough to feel his breath. "I will not be owned," she whispered. Rowan's voice was rough. "Good," he said. "Neither will I." Amara's hand lifted, hovered at his lapel. He did not touch her. He waited. And that waiting, more than a kiss, undid her. Amara pressed her forehead to his chest for one heartbeat, just one. A stolen softness. Then pulled back, eyes bright. "Tell me the plan," she said. The plan was scandal itself, because Halewood's greatest strength wasn't his money, it was secrecy. So they would take secrecy away. On the final night of the house party, Halewood hosted a masquerade in his own ballroom. Music, masks, candlelight, the Ton drunk on the pleasure of pretending. Amara entered in a deep crimson gown with a black lace mask. Rowan wore black, his mask plain, like a man who didn't require decoration to be dangerous. The Duke greeted them with a smile that said, "I own this room." Amara smiled back as if she believed it. Behind her fan, her fingers curled around the folded letters hidden inside her reticule. Rowan had insisted, "We don't show them privately, we show them publicly." Because London could ignore a quiet accusation, but London could not ignore a spectacle. At midnight, the Duke rose to announce the final dance. "All secrets are safe at Halewood," he declared, voice warm. Amara stepped forward before anyone could stop her. She removed her mask. Gasps rippled, because women were not meant to interrupt dukes, and certainly not women like her. "Your Grace," Amara said sweetly, "I believe you are mistaken." The Duke's eyes narrowed slightly. Amara continued, voice calm, carrying. "Halewood does not keep secrets safe," she said. "Halewood keeps them useful." The room stilled. Fans stopped fluttering. The Duke smiled as if amused. "Miss Whitlock," he said softly, "you're making a scene." Amara smiled, sharpened. "Yes," she replied. "That is the point." She reached into her reticule and withdrew the letters. Dozens of pages. Wax seals. Names. The Duke's expression shifted for the first time. Not fear, exactly. Alertness. Rowan stepped beside Amara, not in front, beside, a partner. Amara lifted the top letter. "This," she said clearly, "is a record of payments." Whispers erupted like fire. Payments? To whom? Is she mad? Amara's gaze swept the room. "These letters show who was bribed, who was threatened, and who was silenced," she said, "including the magistrate who ensured Frederick Linton's death became a rumor." The Duke's smile thinned to something sharp. "You're accusing me of murder," he said. Amara's voice didn't shake. "I'm accusing you of ownership," she replied, "and murder was simply one of your methods." The Duke's eyes went cold. He took one step forward. Then Rowan spoke. Quiet, lethal. "One more step," Rowan said, "and I'll read the part where you admit you removed his footing." The room inhaled. The Duke froze. Because Rowan held a letter too. Not Amara's. His. The deed he'd found in the study, now paired with a matching confession. The Duke's gaze flicked around the room, searching for allies. But the Ton was already doing what it always did when power shifted. It was choosing the side that looked safest, and the safest side was the one holding paper. Amara lifted her chin. "You wanted entertainment," she said to the room. "So here it is." Then she did the most scandalous thing of all. She named names, one by one. Men who had smiled at tea tables, women who had giggled behind fans, a magistrate, a banker, a viscount, a duke. Each name fell into the ballroom like a stone. The Duke's composure finally cracked. His voice sharpened. "You don't understand," he hissed. "If you destroy me, you destroy yourselves." Amara's eyes burned. "We were already destroyed," she said softly. "We simply refused to stay buried." The Duke lunged, sudden, furious, reaching for the letters. And in that instant, the final twist struck. Lady Whitlock's letters weren't the only evidence, because Lady Whitlock, Amara's mother, had not simply written. She had planned. Rowan reached into his coat and produced a small ledger, an accountant's record book. Hollywood's crest stamped on the cover. He held it up. "I took this from your study," Rowan said calmly. "Your payments, your debts, your purchases." The Duke's face went white. Because a love letter could be explained away, a ledger could not. Guards surged forward at the hostess's command. The Duke of Hollywood, England's untouchable, was seized in front of his own chandeliers. The Ton gasped, then whispered, then, like always, pretended they had always known. The next morning, the sun rose over Hollywood Manor as if nothing had happened. But everything had. Amara stood in the garden alone, the cold air biting her cheeks, the letters now safely in her hands. She had expected to feel triumph. Instead, she felt grief. For her mother, for the years stolen by a lie, for the girl she had been before London decided she was convenient to ruin. Footsteps came softly behind her. Rowan stopped a respectful distance away. He did not touch her. He waited. Amara didn't look at him at first. "You got what you wanted," she said quietly. Rowan's voice was low. "I got justice," he murmured. "It doesn't feel the way I expected." Amara's throat tightened. "Nothing ever does," she whispered. Rowan inhaled. "And you?" he asked.
Amara finally turned. Her eyes were bright. "I got my name back," she said, "but I don't know what to do with the emptiness where the fear used to be." Rowan's gaze softened. "Fill it with something you chose," he said. Amara swallowed hard. "And what are you? A choice or a consequence?" Rowan stepped closer, slowly, close enough that she could see the truth in his eyes. "I was a consequence," he admitted. "Then you became a choice." Amara's breath caught. Rowan stopped.
"May I?" he asked, voice rough. Not "I will," not "you're mine." "May I?" Amara lifted her gloved hand and placed it against his cheek. Permission. Rowan exhaled like a man saved. He covered her hand with his, gentle, steady. Then he kissed her, not like a man claiming, like a man honoring. When they broke apart, Amara's forehead rested briefly against his. "If you ever try to cage me," she whispered, "I will burn your world down." Rowan's mouth curved, soft and stunned. "I believe you," he murmured. "That's why I want you." Amara's eyes closed for one beat, and for the first time in years, she let herself feel something dangerous and warm. Hope. When Amara returned to London, the Ton tried to rewrite the story. They always did. They said she was brave. They said she was reckless. They said she'd been lucky. A lady hissed behind her fan at a ball. Murderous. Amara turned calmly. "No," she said softly, "just difficult to silence." Rowan, now standing beside her in full view, offered his hand. "Shall we dance?" he asked. Amara's mouth curved. "Try to keep up," she murmured. And as they stepped onto the floor, London watched, furious, fascinated, helpless. Because the most scandalous thing a woman can do is not to be desired. It is to survive the lie they built around her and still choose love on her own terms. Loveliest listener of the ton. Sometimes romance isn't the rescue. Sometimes it's the first person who asks permission after the world spent years trying to take.